Fala, gurizada, tudo belezinha? Colvara na área. E aí, gurizada, o que tu acha, que vocês acham aí de a gente assistir um documentário sobre a história da Nintendo, hein? Bora fazer isso nessa live aí, cara. Tinha falado pra vocês ontem na gameplay do Paper Mario. Inclusive, quem não assistiu tava massa a gameplay, dei uma conferida aí. E eu ia fazer outra gameplay hoje, cara, só que aí eu tinha me lembrado, cara, hoje durante o dia trabalhando me lembrei. Semana passada eu tive essa ideia. Tava pesquisando, né? Normal, tô sempre pesquisando coisa sobre a Nintendo, né? E aí achei esse documentário. Que eu já tinha assistido há muito tempo, ele é antigo, só que eu assisti em inglês, né? Só fui vendo ali as coisas e entendendo um pouco do que eu entendia, né? Do meu inglês. Só que eu acabei achando esse do canal do Nintendo Dreaming, cara, do grande Amauri, cara. Aí eu entrei em contato com ele, falei com ele, ô Amauri, olha só, tive essa ideia, não sei o quê. Posso assistir lá um vídeo seu? Ele, claro, pode, me liberou de boa, né? E. E aí. Ele legendou, cara. Tá todo legendado em português direitinho. Então, cara, eu vou assistir isso aí com a galera, cara. Eu não vou assistir sozinho isso aí. É legal a gente assistir de galera comentando. Então, estamos aqui pra assistir ao documentário sobre a história da Nintendo. Eu agora vou dar aquela enroladinha básica até a galera chegar. O Aspirando Games já está aí. Fala, Gui! Salve, cara! Passando pra deixar o like. Show de bola, Gui. Brigadão, cara. Fabião, fala, Fabião. Bora assistir um documentário aí, meu. Bora conferir. Não, cara, isso aí tem que assistir com a galera, cara. Então, quem teve o trabalho de traduzir foi o Amauri do Nintendo Dreaming, cara. O link do canal dele tá aqui na descrição, tá? Confira o conteúdo dele, é muito massa. Tá sempre fazendo live, batendo um papo com a galera lá. E se inscrevam lá, meu. Dá essa força aí pra ele, meu. Deixa eu ver como é que tá o retorno aqui, como é que tá o áudio. O link do canal dele tá aqui na descrição, tá? Confira o conteúdo dele, é muito massa, tá sempre... Show de bola. Eu vou soltar, aproveitar... Ô, Fábio, me dá um retorno aí. Eu vou soltar o iniciozinho aqui do áudio do documentário. E tu me diz como é que tá, cara, em relação à minha voz, ó. Vou soltar aqui, ó.
ACESSE was the creation of Nintendo's own distribution network, a vital piece of the puzzle that would serve
Tem
the
que aumentar
company
o
well
som
over the
em
next
relação à minha
several
voz, tá?
decades.
Minha voz tá
By
muito alta.
1949, his great-grandson Hiroshi
Como é
took
que tá?
over and
Me diz
began
aí.
to move it into the modern era. While
Deixa eu ver o retorno lá.
49, his great-grandson Hiroshi
Como é
took
que tá?
over and
Me diz
began
aí.
to move it into the modern era. While
Tá bom o áudio? Show de bola. Fala, Michael Rodrigues! Quanto tempo, meu? Boa noite, cara. Bem-vindo aí. Fala, Gabriela. Já tava pensando que não ia ter. Não, vai ter sim, cara. Vai ter. É uma horinha, cara. É rapidinho. Aí até umas 11h30 a gente já terminou já. Tá bom? Show de bola, cara. Então vamos dar já, meu. Deixa eu ajeitar meu retorno aqui, que aí eu vou botar em tela cheia pra mim, óbvio, aqui, né? E aí... Eu vou lendo os comentários de vocês pelo retorno no celular. Eu tô meio chateado, cara. Tô fazendo um desabafo com vocês. Aqui no Rio Grande do Sul, cara, tem um troço que é uma praga, cara. Geralmente no inverno, faz muito frio, obviamente, né? Aqui chegou essa semana a ter picos de 3 graus, cara. Quase 0 graus chegou. E do nada aumenta a temperatura. Então, que nem essa semana ali, terça, quarta-feira, a gente teve 3 graus de temperatura. Até quinta, né? 3 graus de temperatura. E hoje nós estamos batendo pico de 28 graus, cara. Então é assim, é os extremos, cara. Do frio congelante ao calor absurdo. É pra nós, 30 graus aí já é calor, né, cara? E, cara, aí gera uma umidade do caramba, cara. Que aí começa, né, a casa descongelar, entre aspas. E. E gera uma umidade do caramba, meu. E aí, cara, a minha estante de coleção apareceu toda úmida, tive que secar ela. Por mais que o cara seque, sempre fica alguma coisa de umidade. E agora, quando eu fui sentar no PC, apareceu umas manchas na minha TV aqui, cara, no meu monitor. E aí tá assim, cara. Eu não sei se eu vou conseguir mostrar pra vocês, cara. Deixa eu ver aqui. Eu vou tirar o filtro. Ah, tá até errado aqui a câmera que eu bati aqui agora. Eu vou tirar o filtro do Chroma aqui pra vocês verem. Tá? Pera aí. Filtros. Ó, tirei o filtro do Chroma aqui. tá? Eu vou filmar o monitor agora pra vocês verem, ó. É que não sei se vai dar pra ver. Aqui, ó. Vocês estão vendo bem aqui, ó. Branquiçado, ó. Aí tem outro aqui. Tem outro mais aqui embaixo. Lá do outro lado, lá também, aqui, ó. Tem um aqui. Branquiçado, ó. Apareceu. E mais umas manchinhas mais escuras aqui, ó. Mas apareceu essas manchas aí, cara, ó. Consegue ver? Dá pra ver direitinho, ó, que tá mais branquiçado, ó. Aí apareceu isso, cara. Só pode ser por causa da umidade, cara. Não tem outra explicação. Fala, Filemon! Fala, Netão! Assistindo na TV aqui, não faz muito que eu cheguei em casa. Boa, meu, show de bola. Eu não vou, já vou iniciar já, cara. Aí sim, estudar a história do videogame é muito massa, cara. E eu já tô até com outro engatilhado. Talvez pra semana que vem a gente vai assistir o documentário sobre a história dos videogames em geral, né, meu? Eu tô me inspirando mais ou menos no Arnaldo DK, cara. O Arnaldo DK na Twitch, ele anda fazendo uma série assistindo filme antigo, né? E eu, cara, é legal, acho tri, assim, a ideia assim, não, mas tem que ser alguma coisa agregada ao videogame, cara. Aí eu, foi onde eu tive a ideia, não, bom, peraí, cara, tem uns documentários da história da Nintendo aí, meu. Aí vamos assistir. Aqui só tá água nas paredes por causa. Sim, cara, tá tudo úmido aqui, cara. Minha escada aqui, cara, tá um sabão, cara. Eu quase escorreguei e caí, cara, na escada. Fala, Toutimilho! Mas também, né, não é. Tem lugar que não esteja vertendo ar. É, cara. Fala, Johnny Santos. Boa noite, Colvara. Tamo na área curtindo essa live. Boa, meu. Bora, meu, vamos assistir aí. Como é que vai funcionar, tá? Obviamente, eu vou deixar minha facecam, até vou reduzir mais ela. Eu vou deixar em tela cheia. Deixa eu ver como é que fica em tela cheia aqui. Ó, vou botar em tela cheia. Deixa eu ver no retorno o quanto que vai tapar. Então, só lembrando, peguei o vídeo, falei com o Mauri, ele me liberou, me permitiu. E o link do canal dele, pra quem não conhece o canal Nintendo Dreaming, o link do canal dele tá na descrição, cara. Bora conferir lá o Mauri, que é muito massa o conteúdo do Mauri, meu. O cara manja demais, demais, demais de Nintendo, cara.
In the video game industry, countless
Essa parte que eu quero ver. Deixar pausado aqui, pra ver o quanto que aí eu reduzo minha facecam, que tanto faz. É só pra vocês ficarem me vendo, assistindo ali. Vendo, provavelmente eu vou chorar nessa merda aqui, cara, que eu já tô vendo, que tá louco. Como é que é? Depois eu vejo o livro que eu te recomendei. Eu não cacei ele ainda, ô Filemon. Mas eu vou caçar certo, cara. Eu tô esperando, é pra chegar semana que vem, cara. O meu da A Guerra dos Consoles. Fala, Sidney! Obrigadão, cara. Obrigado, Sidney. Eu vou o nome do canal pro Colvara DK. Não, não, canal do Colvarinha, cara. Então deixa aqui, cara. Eu vou reduzir um pouquinho minha facecam. Aqui eu acho que já tá show. Aí, boa. E aí, como é que vai funcionar, cara? Ó, vou combinar com vocês. Tá em 720 já, beleza. Vou voltar aqui. Como é que vai funcionar? Eu não vou ficar falando pra atrapalhar o áudio, né? Que a galera vai querer estar assistindo ali. Eu não vou ficar falando muito. Ó, vou fazer alguns breves comentários, talvez, o troço que eu achar legal. Mas vou tentar. Como tem ali 1h20, bem dizer, né? De documentário. Acho que de 20 em 20 minutos eu dou uma paradinha ali. 2, 3 minutinhos só pra comentar, ver ali, dar uma olhadinha no chat, tá? Eu vou estar acompanhando o chat, mas eu não vou estar respondendo todo mundo, porque a gente vai estar assistindo, que nem eu falei. Vai ficar chato da porra eu falando por cima do cara falando e eu não vou conseguir prestar atenção. Então eu vou fazer umas pausas pra ir batendo um papo com a galera nos comentários. Mas eu vou estar acompanhando. Se eu ver algum comentário aí que eu tenho que responder, que eu acho muito interessante responder daí, eu pauso o vídeo e comento, pra não atrapalhar a galera ali em relação ao áudio. Belezinha? Fala, Caio Gamer! Tranquilo, cara? Cara, o Caio Gamer tá iniciando o canal dele, cara. Quem quiser dar uma conferidinha, eu acho que ele lançou um vídeo só até agora lá. E nesse início de canal é complicado, meu. Quem quiser, passa lá no canal dele pra dar um apoio aí, meu. Só clicar no nome dele e dá uma força lá, meu. Início de canal é foda pra caramba, meu. Já tô com meu suquinho de uva aqui separadinho. Bora então? Vão me dizendo aí como é que tá o áudio. Se quiserem que eu aumente o áudio de lá, eu aumento, tá? Então bora! Ali, ó, vamos dar a lida aqui, ó. Pausar pra dar uma lida, ó. Este vídeo foi baixado do YouTube legendado para expandir a história aqui descrita para as pessoas do meu país que não entendem inglês. Não tem... Eita, nós! Superchat pra incendiar a ideia. Vou ver offline. Brigadão, Gabs Augusto. Obrigado, meu. Obrigadão mesmo, cara. Não, semana que vem eu tô falando, cara. Já tô engatilhado já pra gente assistir a história do videogame, que tem um documentário massa também. A gente vai assistir junto aí, cara. Se o clique não criança não bebe. Mas vamos lá. Não tenho intenção nenhuma de monetizar em cima ou tornar crédito de pesquisa que os seus criadores fizeram. O link do canal original está na descrição para quem quiser checar. Legendário para o Mauri Júnior, Nintendo, deixe a sorte para os céus. Boa.
In the video game industry, countless companies have come and gone, but one company has managed to outlast its competition at nearly every turn: Nintendo. For over 3 decades, Nintendo has beaten its rivals by pursuing its own singular vision of bold hardware innovations and games of unmatched creativity. It hasn't always been smooth sailing, though. Along the way, Nintendo's choices as a company have thrilled and baffled gamers. But through all their ups and downs, Nintendo's impact on the industry simply cannot be overstated. Amazingly, Nintendo might never have been so successful if it weren't for one character: Popeye. Yes, that Popeye. In the late 19th century in Kyoto, Japan, artist Fusajiro Yamauchi...
Ai, ai, ai. É que tem esse bug aí, cara, do Stream Elements. Que merda. Tem que voltar tudo. Vamos de novo, meu.
In the video game industry, countless companies have come and gone, but one company has managed to outlast its competition at nearly every turn: Nintendo. For over 3 decades, Nintendo has beaten its rivals by pursuing its own singular vision of bold hardware innovations and games of unmatched creativity. It hasn't always been smooth sailing, though. Along the way, Nintendo's choices as a company have thrilled and baffled gamers. But through all their ups and downs, Nintendo's impact on the industry simply cannot be overstated. Amazingly, Nintendo might
Fala,
never
Nerd
have been so
Profeta. Tranquilo,
successful
cara?
if it weren't for one character: Popeye. Yes, that Popeye. In the late 19th century in Kyoto, Japan, artist Fusajiro Yamauchi had developed great skill at the making and painting of Hanafuda, Japanese playing cards that were intricately detailed with beautiful and colorful imagery. By 1894, Yamauchi opened up his own
Fala,
household
Neném.
manufacturing business. He called his new company Nintendo Kopai. Nintendo roughly translates as leave luck to heaven, a great expression when playing games of chance. The company's cards became so popular that Yamauchi had to hire assistants to help him move from handmade hanafuda to mass production. In 1929, Yamauchi's son-in-law Sekiro took over the business. One of Sekiro's most important acts was the creation of Nintendo's own distribution network, a vital piece of the puzzle that would serve the company well over the next several decades. By 1949, his great-grandson Hiroshi took over and
cabelinho
began
pintadinho,
to move it into
rapaz.
the modern era. While business for the company was going smoothly, something happened to Yamauchi during a visit to the United States that changed Nintendo forever. Author Jeff Ryan's 2011 book Super Mario: How Nintendo Conquered America provides an in-depth account of Nintendo's beginnings. As the book describes, Yamauchi took a meeting with Disney executives to license their characters for Nintendo cards. Seeing the vastness of Disney's empire firsthand revealed just how huge a global entertainment company could become. Yamauchi knew he would never settle for less than worldwide success. In an interview with Machinima, author Jeff Ryan explains that Yamauchi's coming of age as Japan lost the Second World War gave the man a hard edge, one that would drive him in business for the rest of his life.
He came out of World War II, and he was from the Japanese side, so he was it was the whole greatest generation thing mixed in with the fact that his side had lost and he was running his grandfather's company, and he needed to make a lot of tough decisions. And for about 30 years, he was making decisions that didn't quite play out. But every time he tried something, he would learn from the failure. Mostly, he would
aspiradorzinho de
learn,
pó.
well, we don't do that again.
In
Controle remoto.
1963, the
Ideia do
business's
Gunpei
name
Yokoi.
changed to simply the Nintendo Company Limited, a move reflecting its expansion into other ventures. However, the company's card-making experience helped it break into one business: toys. Author Jeff Ryan explains how Nintendo transitioned from cards to toys with the help of its existing distribution network.
Trading cards kept on making money, but it was a small amount of money. He realized that there was a distribution network that was valuable beyond just the cards that they were selling, because that allowed him, if he wanted to make a toy, he could get it into every toy store in Japan, which was something that a normal toy manufacturer starting from scratch can't do.
Its first toy was the Ultra Hand, an extendable arm invented by Gunpei Yokoi, a maintenance worker from Nintendo's card-making factories. Yokoi had originally created the Ultra Hand for his own amusement, but Yamauchi saw Yokoi's potential. The toy went to market in 1970, selling 1.2 million units. Nintendo was officially in the toy business.
Olha só deixa eu fazer um breve comentário, meu. Esses troços verdes que tá dando é do vídeo, tá? É troço antigo pra caramba, né? Isso eu tô lendo, tá? A galera não sabe. Eu tô comecei uma pesquisa própria. Eu tô relendo meu livro, Os Bastidores da Nintendo, um livro que eu tenho há muito tempo, li lá em 2011, 2012, quando comprei. E eu tô relendo ele, tá? E eu comprei mais um livro também, que é a Guerra dos Consoles, que eu tô pesquisando, que eu quero fazer uma série minha contando a história da Nintendo, só que não contando assim didaticamente, como se fosse uma conversa, eu conversando alguns pontos, por que eu gosto tanto de Nintendo, assim, mas é mais como se fosse um bate-papo e destacando alguns trechos. E pra mim fazer isso, por mais que eu saiba bastante coisa sobre a Nintendo, eu tenho que ter uma fonte, né? Eu tenho que ter uma base também pra me relembrar vários detalhes, né? E fazendo essa leitura, cara, eu me lembrei de um detalhe... Me lembrei não, né? Me relembrei de um detalhe... Cara, o Gunpei Yokoi, ele foi motorista do Yamauchi, cara. E ele apresentou a ideia da Ultra Hand, que o Yamauchi, o Yokoi, ele era inventor, cara, ele criava os negócios, né? E ele apresentou essa ideia pro Yamauchi após eles chegarem numa viagem e tava meio serião, assim, quietão, né? É o que mais ou menos que eu interpretei do livro, né? E pra quebrar esse clima chatão, que o Yamauchi ali era meio casca-grossa, né? O Gunpei Yokoi vai e apresenta o Ultra Hand e o Yamauchi já brilha os olhinhos, né, cara? Colvara recomenda as revistas do... Eu tenho, cara, eu tenho as Warp Zones. Vamos lá, bora.
Other products followed, Yokoi's creativity leading the charge. The 10 billion barrel was an innovative marble puzzle, while the Love Tester was an electronic passion measuring device that could only come from Japan. Through the 70s, Nintendo also tested Japan's video game market, releasing arcade games and Pong-cloned TV consoles. In 1979, they scored their biggest hit, Radar Scope, a Space Invaders imitator. In 1980, Nintendo released another Yokoi invention, the handheld Game & Watch. Inspired by the LCD screens of pocket calculators, Yokoi's invention was simple but addictive, and kept Nintendo heading towards the electronic entertainment business. That year, Yamauchi sought expansion into America. To set up Nintendo's American branch, the chairman tapped son-in-law
Ó o bundão aí, esse aí é bundão, cara.
with Yamauchi's daughter, Yoko. The Arakawa set up shop at a warehouse in Elizabeth, New Jersey. To get the ball rolling, their first game would be their Japanese hit, Radar Scope. 3,000 cabinets shipped from Japan. Arakawa's attempts to sell the game didn't go well. He only managed to move a third of their supply, leaving about 2,000 machines sitting in the warehouse. Worse, Radar Scope wasn't scoring well with the arcade owners, who preferred games from proven names like Namco or the Arcade King, Atari. The fledgling Nintendo of America had only broken even on the venture so far. They needed a new, inexpensive game, and soon. While his father-in-law looked at his staff in Kyoto for ideas, the Arakawas moved back to the Pacific Northwest. Yamauchi was no fool. He knew better than to commit too many resources to what was turning into a losing proposition. So instead of pulling one of Nintendo's proven designers from other projects, he solicited ideas from his entire company, hoping to make an unexpected discovery within his company. Discover he did. Shigeru Miyamoto, a 29-year-old staff artist, piqued Yamauchi's interest.
Aí, bundinha,
Miyamoto
bundinha,
was
carinha de
teamed with
bundinha.
Gunpei Yokoi, who would help turn the new designer's ideas into reality. The two would use a conversion kit to transform those unsold radar scopes into something new. But before they began, they hit a snag. Yamauchi's wanted to base a game on a popular character to spur sales. It just so happened that a new Hollywood movie based on Popeye was in production. And 20 years earlier, Nintendo had released a ramen product based on the spinach-eating sailor. Yamauchi believed acquiring the rights would be a cinch, but weren't available after all. Miyamoto was undeterred. Already on course for a great new game, all he had to do was tweak the characters a bit. Olive Oil was made into the generic lady, while Bluto devolved into the giant, stubborn ape he'd always resembled. And Popeye would leave the Navy and become a carpenter. That love triangle featured in Popeye's cartoons and comic strips informed these new characters and set players off on a quest to rescue the damsel in distress. The story of the new game was a great hook, but no one would pump quarters into a game that didn't play well. Fortunately, Miyamoto happened to be a game designing genius, a fact no one, not even himself, had realized until he'd gotten the job. Gone was Radar Scope's derivative alien shooting mechanic. This new game wouldn't have any shooting at all. Instead, players would have to direct the in-game avatars safely up a construction site to rescue the kidnapped lady, jumping over barrels and finding scattered hammers to clear away threats. This new Jumpman, as Miyamoto called him, offered a new way to play, and the development team knew it would be special. As for the game's title, Miyamoto looked to Japan and America's shared history of gigantic movie monsters. King Kong, of course, was the biggest ape around. But this was King Monsters. Title, Miyamoto looked to Japan and America's shared history of gigantic movie monsters. King Kong, of course, was the biggest ape around. But this was no king. This ape was not only stubborn, but like Bluto, pretty stupid. More like an ass. Or a donkey. Donkey Kong had a name. But they still needed names for the other two characters. Lady would be named Pauline, in thanks to their kind warehouse manager Don James, whose wife's name was Polly. The game's hero, however, was named after the warehouse's owner, James's hot-headed boss, Mario Siegel. Arakawa and his small team started hand-converting radar scope cabinets to Donkey Kong machines. In 1981, Arakawa put the test machines in 2 Seattle bars, and they took off like Radar Scope never did. The machines earned more than $30 a day in quarters, prompting Arakawa to install more machines. Soon enough, the cabinets each made Nintendo $200 a week. Arakawa and his team converted the rest of the 2,000 Radar Scope cabinets by hand, and began manufacturing hundreds of new Donkey Kong machines to keep up with the growing demand. Soon enough, there were 60,000 Donkey Kong machines in operation throughout North America that year. Nintendo had arrived, and it was all thanks to the inspiration of Popeye the Sailor Man and Miyamoto's genius. Nintendo exploded onto the arcade scene and brought success Yamauchi had known would one day be his. But in addition to growing into a bigger business, Nintendo had also grown into a bigger target.
Aí, fazer
Tune
uma
in next
pausa aí.
time to see Mario.
O que seria a Nintendo se não fosse... Cara, o Miyamoto basicamente é um dos principais pilares da Nintendo, cara. Da Nintendo videogame, né? Cara, eu fico pensando como um monte de coisas inesperadas tornaram Nintendo e Mario hoje. Imagina se ele tivesse usado o Popeye. Pois é, cara, imagina. Existe muito disso nos negócios, né? Ter um pouco de sorte, né, cara? Nossa, se tivesse usado o Popeye, não seria nem perto que é hoje. Marcegar era o seu barriga da Nintendo da América. Boa, Neto. O Aracal era o Pato Donald e o Yamauchi era o tio Patinhas. Ultra Rei dos caras inventaram pra coçar as costas. Vamos lá, bora.
Mario gets Super. As 1981 drew to a close, over 60,000 Donkey Kong arcade cabinets dotted North America. By 1982, Nintendo manufactured up to 50 cabinets per day. In its first year in the US, Donkey Kong earned $180 million for Nintendo. In its next year, the barrel-throwing ape earned another $100 million, launching Nintendo into the video game stratosphere. In July 1982, Nintendo of America bought 27 acres in Redmond, saying goodbye to the warehouse in Tukwila, Washington, that was owned by Jumpman's namesake Mario Siegel. Riding high on Donkey Kong's success, Nintendo was gearing up to bring the arcade into customers' homes. But not only would they soon face monkey business in the courtroom, Nintendo would once again face an uphill battle to sell America on its latest product. Soon their success in the States would seem like nothing more than a pipe dream. But sometimes...
breve comentário ali. A galera marreteia a Nintendo, né, dizendo que ela, que meu Deus, ela é retrógrada, toda fechada, que não sei o que mais e blá blá blá. Mas olha o início dela, meu. Logo que começou a fazer sucesso, cara, as outras empresas, tudo olho gordo em cima aí, ó, tentando... é porque é o King Kong, é o King Kong. Nada a ver, meu. Eu acho que o Popeye não tem hoje em dia por causa da politicamente correto. Será, cara?
As Donkey Kong guzzled quarters across America in 1981, its creator Shigeru Miyamoto set up to work on a sequel. In 1982, Nintendo released Donkey Kong Jr., a follow-up as unconventional as its predecessor. Instead of keeping Mario in the position of the hero, Miyamoto decided to cast him as the villain, having cruelly locked Donkey Kong in a cage at the top of the screen. Playing the role of the hero this time was Donkey Kong's son, who climbed vines and chains while dodging toothsome enemies to save his father. Despite the potentially blasphemous switcheroo of making Mario the antagonist, Miyamoto had scored again. Donkey Kong Jr. managed to sell over 30,000 cabinets. Donkey Kong was a force to be reckoned with. The brand's success paved the way for another lucrative opportunity for Nintendo: licensing and merchandising. Console maker Coleco gained the rights to make a home version of the game. And outside of video games...
Que é? Pera aí que eu vou ver. Você tá pedindo a janta. Eu tenho que desbloquear o cartão aqui. Pera aí, gurizada. Peraí. Cartão virtual. Tá desbloqueado. Bora.
Nintendo found that Donkey Kong's face looked good on everything: board games, stuffed animals, and more. But to MCA Universal, the movie studio behind 1976's King Kong feature film, Donkey Kong simply looked like an ever-growing dollar sign. After countless threats of legal action and after scoring multi-million-dollar settlements with nearly every Donkey Kong license, Universal filed suit against Nintendo on June 26, 1982. The studio alleged that Donkey Kong infringed on their King Kong copyright. The video game maker, however, refused to budge. The case went to trial in early 1983, and Nintendo prevailed with ease. Its lawyers, led by attorney John Kirby, established the many differences between the conflicting Kongs. But if this weren't enough for the judge, Kirby proved that, in fact, Universal hadn't a legal leg to stand on. In 1975, the studio had sued previous King Kong picture maker RKO Pictures, and had itself proven that King Kong was in the public domain. The result of the 75 case cleared the way for Universal's 76 film remake. It also caused the judge to throw the suit against Nintendo out of court in '83. Nintendo had taken on the powerhouses of American entertainment and emerged victorious. While Nintendo of America defended itself in court, Nintendo in Japan had released its next big product, the Nintendo Family Computer, or the Famicom. According to Jeff Ryan's Super Mario: How Nintendo Conquered America, Nintendo president Hiroshi Yamauchi had the Famicom in the works for years. The 8-bit home console featured two wired controllers with raised directional pads and two-face buttons, a design that had originated with Gunpei Yokoi's Game & Watch. In July 1983, the Famicom was released in Japan with ports of Nintendo's American hits, Donkey Kong, Donkey Kong Jr., and the game that finally realized Yamauchi's vision, Popeye, a title that shared plenty in common with, what else? Donkey Kong.
Pera aí, cara, que minha gata tá destruindo aqui o chroma key. Passa, Mimim! Passa lá! Voltou aqui do presidente.
Nintendo finally wrangled the rights to the Sailor Man who had inspired Nintendo's biggest hit. That year, Nintendo sold over 500,000 Famicoms. The next year, it shattered that number by moving 3 million consoles. Nintendo had another hit on its hands, and the next step was to bring it to the US. But there was one problem. In 1983, the American video game market had crashed, a consequence of too many overpriced and underwhelming systems competing with each other. Game developers sprang up like mushrooms, creating unauthorized and often lousy games for the many consoles on the market. By 1984, the idea of a home video game system was anathema to American audiences and retailers alike. Once again, Nintendo of America's president, Minoru Arakawa, had an uphill battle selling the systems in the States. The fact that, by 1985, the Famicom had sold over 19 million units in Japan didn't impress American retailers, still smarting over the money they'd lost on video games so recently. So instead of trying to sell a game system, why not try to sell a toy? Nintendo tried to hide the console's true nature, packaging it with a toy robot, the Robotic Operating Buddy, or ROB, along with games Gyromite and StackUp. No one was fooled, and the plan didn't work. Yamauchi ordered Arakawa and his team to sell the systems to New York toy stores personally. Arakawa followed Yamauchi's bidding, but went a step further. According to Ryan's book, Arakawa went over Yamauchi's head, assuring retailers that they could get full refunds on any unsold systems, a gutsy move that could have cost Nintendo dearly. Fortunately, Arakawa's gamble paid off, and 50,000 units sold in New York. Similar rollouts in other major cities over the next few months yielded similar results. By 1986, Nintendo...
Aqui tá meio rushado, tá? Como é 1h20, para resumir uma história aí que passa dos 100 anos, tá meio rushado. Mas na verdade o Arakawa, ele não tinha muita voz, ele tinha medo de enfrentar o Yamauchi. E a mulher dele que meio que pressionava. Na verdade, a mulher do Arakawa tentou diversas vezes fazer ele não aceitar esse convite do Yamauchi de liderar a Nintendo dos Estados Unidos, né? E aí, toda decisão que ele tinha que tomar, o Arakawa, ele tinha medo, cara, do Yamauchi, de conversar com ele lá, e tomava não, o Yamauchi dava uns esporros nele lá, e tudo mais. E nessa foi a primeira jogada dele que ele meio que peitou, que foi que deu certo, tá ligado? E é a partir dali que ele começou a ter um certo respeito pelo... O Yamauchi começou a ter um certo respeito pelo Arakawa, né? Essa ideia do hobby... foi uma ideia, uma sacada de mestre, cara, do Arakawa. Por quê? Como o videogame tava muito queimado nos Estados Unidos por causa da Atari e do crash dos games, tudo mais que a galera sabe, e tudo mais. Olha o Zelda sendo vendido a $34. Olha quanto é que era o AAA da época lá, ó. Bem no cantinho ali. Foi uma ideia muito boa pra associar o NES a brinquedo. Que era pra despistar dessa visão ruim que a galera tinha em relação a videogames, entendeu? Só meio que dando uma resumida que aqui tá rushado por causa que, pô, é em vídeo, tá ligado? Eu tenho um gato também, um Simon, de vez em quando ele escala a TV no meio da live. Não, os gatos é um bicho incrível, cara. Engraçado que o parque da Nintendo vai ser da Universo. Ó, o mundo dá volta, né, cara? Vamos lá.
Nintendo was finally able to release the Famicom, now named the Nintendo Entertainment System, nationally. It didn't hurt that it came packed with one of the most incredible games yet, Shigeru Miyamoto's Super Mario Bros. Before Nintendo
Deixa eu voltar
devoted
aqui só
most of its
detalhezinho.
Shigeru Miyamoto
O início do canal, meu canal, as thumb, o padrão das thumb era como se fosse a caixa do NES, né? A borda preta, ficava o título ali embaixo ali, e onde tá ali o Mario era a imagem que eu botava relacionado ali e tudo mais, né? Foi a minha inspiração para as thumb, as primeiras thumb do canal foi como se fosse o cartuchinho do NES.
Super Mario Bros. Before Nintendo devoted most of its resources to the Famicom and NES, Miyamoto kept working on arcade games. He had spun Mario off into his own game in 1983. Mario Bros. Took place in a pipe-filled sewer, where the pair worked together to knock out as many turtles and crabs as they could. When Miyamoto was promoted to make Famicom games, he took Mario with him. The result was like nothing seen before. A whole kingdom full of secrets, growth-inducing mushrooms, warp zones, stompable enemies, and, of course, lots of pipes. Super Mario Bros.' 1985 debut was a massive success, driving the system's sales and hooking American gamers in ways the Atari and ColecoVision never could. To date, Super Mario Bros. Is said to have sold more than 40 million copies worldwide, holding the record for the best-selling video game for a full 18 years. Miyamoto kept working, creating another masterpiece inspired by his childhood spent roaming the woods and caves in Kyoto. February 1986's The Legend of Zelda, a questing game, featured even deeper exploration than Super Mario Bros. Clearly, Zelda's grand scope and massive dungeons touched something within gamers, and Nintendo had another hit. Other now legendary games followed, like the lonely and haunting space adventure Metroid, designed by Yokoi. That title blew people's minds with the end-of-game revelation that its silent protagonist, Samus Aran, was actually a woman. However, a console can't survive on first-party games alone. Third-party developers were contracted to develop new titles for the NES, but Nintendo's new machine featured a lockout chip that only Nintendo could supply. The chip drove up the costs of production, and games lacking the chip wouldn't play. Nintendo had control. While the chips ensured quality NES games, the way Nintendo lorded them over its third-party developers guaranteed an unhealthy relationship. In fact, a 1988 chip shortage led to just that. Author Jeff Ryan explains how Nintendo handled the shortage.
Nintendo decided to ration the chips, which was in one way the only thing they could do. There's not enough supply to meet the demand, so therefore you only give some to everyone. Now, they gave themselves as many chips in the world, but for something like Konami or Capcom, they wouldn't make more than 100,000 copies of a game, and this is a game that could sell millions. And if Konami or Capcom complained, Nintendo would maybe cut their order even more, so they only have 90,000.
Despite Nintendo's strained relationship with third parties, its relationship to gamers was only getting stronger, thanks largely to Shigeru Miyamoto's continued brilliance, though he wasn't infallible. In fact, his 1986 follow-up to the original Super Mario Bros. Never saw release in the United States, as it was deemed too challenging. It had all the familiar hallmarks of the original game, but harder. Some mushrooms made Mario super, but some mushrooms actually killed him. Nintendo of America thought it was more sadistic than satisfying. But Super Mario needed a sequel, so Miyamoto oversaw production on converting another game, Yumi Kojo Doki Doki Panic, into a new Mario title. Gone was the Mushroom Kingdom and Bowser, in their place was Subcon, a dream world players had to free from the clutches of Wart, an evil frog. And instead of jumping on enemies to stomp them, players could ride them, pick them up, and toss them at other bad guys. Besides the picture on the box, there wasn't much tying the game in with Super Mario. Fortunately for Nintendo, fans were more than happy to explore the world of Subcon. Super Mario Bros. 2 sold over 7 million copies in its 1988 North American debut. Miyamoto still wanted a proper sequel though. His next project was a true continuation for Super Mario that would both bring the game back to its roots while moving the series forward by leaps and bounds. The result was Super Mario Bros. 3. Players encountered the familiar mechanics of jumping and stomping that made the original game so great, while contending with new powers and abilities. Super Mario Bros. 3 was everything people loved about the first game, but better. And in 1989, as its North American debut drew near, Nintendo of America was approached by Universal Pictures, the same studio that had sued them over Donkey Kong's alleged copyright infringements. The studio's plans for a big-screen version of the Jetsons was delayed, and they needed a project to appeal to kids around the holidays. The result was The Wizard, a movie starring Fred Savage and Christian Slater, depicting two brothers' journeys across the country on a quest to win a video game tournament.
É muito massa esse filme,
and the game
cara.
featured at the tournament
Podia
itself,
assistir esse filme aí, meu.
none other than Super Mario Bros. 3, which made its North American debut in multiplexes across the country. While The Wizard isn't remembered as much more than an afterthought, Super Mario Bros. 3's release in February 1990 found its place in the history books. It was Nintendo's biggest hit yet, selling 18 million copies and achieving the record for the best-selling video game not bundled with a system. As it began the 1990s, Nintendo had been transformed since its tentative entrance into the video game market a decade before. Instead of simply being a player in the industry, Nintendo practiced.
O Neto tá loucão, cara. Mandando os nomes do jogo aí. Fala, Maurício Mendes.
Practically owned it. The company seemed invincible. But soon enough, Nintendo would discover the price for not playing well with others. Tune in next time to see Nintendo go portable. By the late 1980s, Nintendo seemed to have sewn up the video game industry across the globe. The Nintendo Entertainment System was a staple of the American family room, and Super Mario was a household name, starring in 3 hit games, several cartoons, and appearing on every product Nintendo could license. But in 1987, NEC released the PC Engine in Japan, a 16-bit competitor to Nintendo's 8-bit Famicom. A year later in 1988, Sega released their 16-bit Mega Drive console. Nintendo couldn't rest on its laurels and remained the dominant force in video games. Ironically, Nintendo's next big idea was a bit on the small side.
Game Boy. É muito bom aquele filme ali, ó.
Gunpei Yokoi's handheld Game & Watch LCD toys was one of Nintendo's earliest successes in the video game industry. But the future was clearly consoles, and Yokoi had been working on a portable version of the Famicom for years. Replicating the bright, colorful animation of most home consoles would require a backlight and a big drain on the device's battery life, not to mention pricey manufacturing costs. To keep costs down and batteries up, the system would skip color altogether. Yokoi's final design was finished and released as the Game Boy in April 1989. The 8-bit 2-button console took 4 AA batteries that lasted for at least 10 hours, all for about $90. While the Game Boy's monochromatic greenish display wasn't much to look at, and couldn't be seen at all in the dark, it gave consumers one of the most successful pack-in titles yet, Tetris, an addictive Russian puzzle game for which Nintendo had purchased the console rights. It proved to be so addictive, in fact, that Nintendo sold out of its initial run of 1 million Game Boy units in mere weeks of its release, likely on the strength of Tetris alone. Estimates pegged Tetris' sales on the Game Boy at over 30 million copies to date. A few months later, in September, Atari released its rival handheld, the backlit, full-color 16-bit Lynx. It didn't stand a chance. The Lynx may have been more powerful, but as Yokoi knew, that power came at a cost. The Lynx's 6 AA batteries could only provide power for roughly half the time of the Game Boy, while selling for more than twice as much, ringing up at $190. The choice for consumers was clear, and the Game Boy was a massive success. Though Sega's 8-bit Game Gear, released a year later, had fared better than the Lynx, the Game Boy was already a runaway train that couldn't be caught. It easily outlasted its competition, selling nearly 119 million units in its unprecedented 14-year life cycle. The fact that the Game Boy boasted Nintendo's exclusive properties only solidified its position as the handheld leader. Shortly after the system's debut, Nintendo published Super Mario Land, a new title produced by Yokoi himself. Mario left the Mushroom Kingdom for a place called Sarasa Land. Instead of rescuing Princess Toadstool from King Koopa, Mario fought a mysterious spaceman named Tatanga to rescue Princess Daisy. But of course, the differences didn't matter. Mario jumped and stomped his way to 18.4 million sales. Other famous names appeared on the Game Boy. Yokoi brought his lonely space adventurer back from Metroid 2: The Return of Samus in 1992, and Shigeru Miyamoto's The Legend of Zelda: Link's Awakening was published a year later. But not every Game Boy star came from the NES first. In 1992, a Nintendo-sponsored developer, HAL Laboratory, created a new platformer called Kirby's Dream Land, which starred a flying pink puffball who could swallow up enemies like a vacuum cleaner. And just as Mario was named after Nintendo's landlord, Kirby was named for John Kirby, the ace attorney who defended the company in Universal's 1983 Donkey Kong lawsuit. Even though Nintendo was handily winning the battle for handhelds, the home console war was heating up. Though the Famicom was king in Japan, by 19...
Detalhe ali, ó. Nessa época aqui, o Iwata trabalhava na HAL Laboratory ainda, né? Mas aqui ele começou já a criar um certo relacionamento com o Yamauchi, nessa época aí.
1983 Donkey Kong lawsuit. Even though Nintendo was handily winning the battle for handhelds, the home console war was heating up. Though the Famicom was king in Japan...
Cara, só um pouquinho que a gata tá em cima aqui da penteadeira, cara. Pera aí. Pronto. Bati no microfone. Não sei se não zoou o áudio. Espero que não. Esperar ver o retorno aqui pra ver se meu áudio zoou ou não. Não, não zoou. Aí, bora.
By 1990, Sega's 16-bit Genesis, the American name for the Mega Drive, was making serious waves. Sega had taken advantage of their competitors' adversarial relationship with third-party developers. For years, Nintendo had held developers hostage by rationing out lockout chips, without which games wouldn't play on the Famicom or NES. Because Nintendo sought absolute control over its products, it transformed itself into little more than a tyrant. Jeff Ryan, author of Super Mario: How Nintendo Conquered America, explains how Sega leveraged Nintendo's bad behavior to their benefit.
When Sega came out with the Genesis, so many third-party developers flocked to them just because Sega was treating their developers well and Nintendo was not. And Nintendo was able to do that because they were the only game in town. They had something like 92% market share. But when the Genesis came around and the Genesis started to gain speed, people realized, oh, finally there's another heavyweight contender out there. There's someone else who can take on the Goliath.
Sega churned out arcade ports and secured exclusive third-party releases, a side effect of a clause in Nintendo's contracts forbidding developers from making games for other consoles. One of the most important turned out to be the very first console version of Electronic Arts' new sports franchise, Madden NFL Football, which earned huge sales during Christmas 1990. And in the following summer, Sega released their own homegrown killer app, a new high-speed platformer called Sonic the Hedgehog. Suddenly, Sega had their own Mario, but one with wild hair, a 90s tood, and the remarkable ability to finally threaten Nintendo's stranglehold on the American console market. But, of course, Nintendo had long been working on the NES's successor. The 16-bit follow-up was released in the fall of 1990 in Japan as the Super Famicom, and in summer 1991 in America as the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. The console came with Shigeru Miyamoto's most expansive and best-looking game yet, Super Mario World. Once again, Nintendo's pack-in title helped move systems. According to Ryan's book, Super Mario World sold 3.5 million copies in Japan, while in the States, gamers bought 17 million. 3 days after its US launch, retailers had sold out of the Super Nintendo console. The SNES was a hit, but unlike its predecessor, it faced some fierce competition. Despite Super Mario World's brilliance, Sonic's rush onto the scene had suddenly made Nintendo seem uncool. Sega seemed to represent everything that was hip and new in video games, while Nintendo looked safe, stodgy, and downright old. Even though 1991's SNES was technologically superior to 1988's Genesis in every way. By 1992, sources estimate the Genesis had a roughly 55% market share over its competitor. By 1993, cracks started appearing in Nintendo's public image. A big-budget Hollywood movie based on Super Mario Bros. Starring Bob Hoskins, John Leguizamo, and Dennis Hopper was released that summer, to abysmal reviews and performance. What should have been Nintendo's ultimate triumph was a universally reviled public embarrassment. Today, Super Mario Bros. Holds a place in cinematic history as not only one of the worst video game movie adaptations, but simply as one of the worst movies. Period. That wasn't the only problem Nintendo faced that year. In September, Acclaim published SNES and Genesis ports of Midway's ultra-violent arcade fighter, Mortal Kombat. But despite being 16-bit versions of the same game, the ports were anything but equal. The Genesis version featured just about every blood-splattering hit and spine-ripping fatality from the original. The SNES port, however, was heavily modified to reflect Nintendo's family-friendly policy. Fatalities were out, tamer finishing moves were in. Absurdly, brutal hits didn't result in sprays of blood, but sprays of grayish sweat. It's estimated that the Genesis version outsold Nintendo's by roughly 4-1. And the move did seemingly irreparable damage to Nintendo's reputation with gamers, as the company continues to fight the perception that it just makes games for kids. But the final tally of the first true console war between the Genesis and the SNES didn't seem to account for Nintendo's missteps. Though Sega never released data, estimates tally the Genesis's worldwide sales at about 29 million worldwide, not quite 2/3 of the Super Nintendo's 49.1 million global sales. When all is said and done, the SNES simply had the better games. Sega's ascendance forced Nintendo to allow multi-platform games from third parties. But Mortal Kombat aside, the Super Nintendo's superior hardware meant that, most of the time, games looked, sounded, and played better. Nintendo could also claim the support of one of Japan's top developers, Squaresoft, whose Final Fantasy series, The Secret of Mana, and Chrono Trigger were SNES exclusives, and helped popularize the RPG genre in America. And besides Super Mario World, the SNES had an impressive roster of first-party games that became industry legends. Familiar titles like The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past and Super Metroid appeared, not to mention launch title F-Zero, the Super FX chip-powered Star Fox, and the genre-spawning Super Mario Kart. And that wasn't all. The company's decision...
Tá sem voz? Tá sem voz? Deixa eu ver aqui.
to buy a 49% stake in British developer Rareware in 1994 proved to be nothing short of genius, as was releasing one of Nintendo's oldest properties from its closely guarded vault. That year, Rare and Nintendo released Donkey Kong Country, a platformer that had more in common with Super Mario Bros. Than the 1981 arcade classic. But visually, Donkey Kong Country was like nothing else on the market. Its developers had animated pre-rendered 3D graphics as 2D sprites. The effect was a game that looked far more technologically advanced than it actually was. Donkey Kong Country sold over 8 million copies worldwide, becoming the second best-selling SNES game of all time. Donkey Kong had come full circle, having regained his rightful place as one of Nintendo's most recognizable and profitable characters. And like Donkey Kong, Nintendo was also regaining its position as top banana in the video game industry. Its reputation for first-class products and its first-class ego had seemed well-earned with the SNES's success. But just as its howdy prideful attitude with third parties had allowed Sega to swoop in, Nintendo's tradition of arrogant business decisions would prove that what goes around, comes around. Tune in next time to see
Valeu,
Sony
canal
come out
Hudson
to play.
Cardoso.
By the mid-1990s, Nintendo had won the 16-bit console war against Sega. But that victory came at a cost. Its reputation faltered when it censored SNES ports of the ultra-violent and ultra-popular Mortal Kombat. More importantly, Nintendo lost its singular hold on third-party developers. Sega wooed many away to make games for their Genesis, a seduction made easy by Nintendo's years of bullying developers into lopsided
Gabriel
contracts.
Lopes.
Nintendo's
Jogo
bad
bonitão até
behavior
hoje, né,
led
meu?
to the first major threat to its industry dominance since Donkey Kong catapulted the company to the top of the video game market. And more of Nintendo's misdeeds would come back to haunt them, as a former business
Wait.
partner would threaten all they had built. Nintendo would soon learn.
Se não me engano, esse é disco melhor servido frio.
Since 1988, Nintendo had been working with electronics giant Sony on a console that would play cartridges and CDs, a true multimedia game machine. But when the joint venture began, Nintendo was still the biggest fish in the relatively small video game pond. As the partnership progressed, it became clear that Nintendo didn't want to cede its complete control, and wanted even less to split the profits. Despite the unhappy marriage, work continued on the new device, culminating in a presentation at the Consumer Electronics
ACESSE.
Show in June 1991. The presentation
de hoje.
showed off what had been dubbed the Nintendo PlayStation. On that day in June, Sony's future in the market looked bright. What a difference a day makes. A day after the PlayStation presentation, Nintendo announced it was breaking its contract with Sony, opting to go with its rival Philips instead. Philips had been working on its own CD-based game machine, the CDI, since 1984, bringing it to market later in 1991. Philips would make the CD-based add-on device for Nintendo's 16-bit consoles, not Sony. Little did Nintendo know, but it had created a monster. Sources say that Nintendo broke its contract with Sony because the two companies could never agree on how to divide the never-ending stream of cash the partnership would have made. Perhaps when the contract between the companies was signed in 1988, no one could predict how ubiquitous and important the CD-based medium would truly become. Signing a deal giving Sony more control and profit over CD-based manufacturing and sales, with Nintendo keeping control only over cartridges, may have seemed harmless at the time. But by 1991, it was clear that CDs and their enormous storage capacity were the future of media. Giving control of manufacturing and distribution of CDs to Sony would have made Sony the heavy hitter in the relationship. Nintendo couldn't play second fiddle. Sony fumed at the betrayal and threatened lawsuits, but there were reasons to keep the attorneys at bay. For instance, Sony had supplied the Super Famicom with its sound chip. Eventually, cooler heads prevailed, but the years of work that had gone into the PlayStation would not be wasted. Company president Norio Oga insisted that the company continue its foray into the video game market. Sony had a competitor to crush. Meanwhile, Nintendo's new partnership with Philips didn't quite pan out.
Bom, o que acontece ali, tá? Na verdade, não tem boazinha e vilã nessa história. Tá? As duas cometeram um erro, né? Entre aspas, né? As duas foram maliciosas no negócio. A Nintendo chupou bala. Os advogados da Nintendo lá chuparam bala, que deixaram... Chuparam bala e depois conseguiram se redimir, entre aspas, né? E deixaram passar nos contratos ali que a Sony teria direitos sobre as IP da Nintendo, né? E os advogados se ligando disso, depois de ter assinado, a Nintendo fez essa sacanagem, que foi uma sacanagem de romper o contrato do nada, mas para proteger as suas IP. Então a Sony tava na malícia ali, fazendo contrato para pegar as franquias da Nintendo, entre aspas, né? E a Nintendo também fez essa sacanagem de romper o contrato e deu no que deu na história aí, né? Consequência, péssimo relacionamento da Big N com as Thirds já nos 80, ela tá sentindo até hoje. Só no Switch que ela tá trazendo, de fato, muitas de volta. Tá bem mais... cara, É que na verdade não é mau relacionamento. A Nintendo era fechada, cara. Ela queria fazer tudo pra ser um negócio duradouro, tá ligado? Claro que teve um custo, por ser muito punho de ferro, tem empresas que acabou se prejudicando, deixando de vender e tudo mais, entendeu? Só que o livre mercado, entre aspas, já foi provado que é ruim pela Atari, né? Então por isso que a Nintendo criou esse selo de qualidade dela.
It's been speculated that Nintendo's about face was an attempt to strong-arm Sony into a revised contract that would benefit Nintendo more. And Philips, it seemed, wanted its CDI media format to be the universal
Olha
standard.
só que merda, né? E os caras cometem a cagada de novo com a Philips, onde saiu as berrações lá do Zelda Lost da Gamelion, sei lá, não faço nem questão de saber o nome direito desses jogos aí.
Machines, an idea that
Horrível.
didn't jibe with Nintendo's preference toward proprietary formats. Worse, Nintendo feared the ease of CD piracy, another potential revenue loss. Nintendo pulled out of that partnership too, but not without paying a price. As part of its agreement with Philips, Nintendo licensed some
Sim,
of its
time, as
trademark characters to
ficaram
appear in
milionários,
CDI
lucraram junto
games.
com a
The
Nintendo. Tem muito
result?
que tava na falência
Hotel
e cresceu
Mario,
junto com a Nintendo,
Link,
cara,
the Faces
né?
of Evil Zelda, The Wand of Gamelon,
Wand
and
of
Zelda's
Gamelon.
Adventure are known as some of the worst games to feature these characters.
Excuse me,
In fact,
princess.
they're regarded as some of the worst games to feature any characters. Needless to say, the experience reinforced one valuable lesson for Nintendo: keep control.
Manter o controle.
While Nintendo dithered between partners, never releasing the CD playing expansion it had planned on since 1988, Sega had no such problems. The Mega CD expansion for the Mega Drive console was released in Japan in late 1991, with the Sega CD hitting North America the next year. Then, in 1994, Sega released the 32X, another add-on to expand the capabilities of the Genesis. But neither of these peripherals did much for Sega. The Genesis had still come up short to the SNES. As the underwhelming and underselling Sega CD proved, the world wasn't ready for CD-based gaming after all. And American consumers knew that the Sega Saturn, a true 32-bit console already a hit in Japan in '94, was set for a fall 1995 release, so they largely ignored the 32X. But when Sega made a surprise E3 announcement that the Saturn would launch in May,
Eu achei bonito demais,
customers,
cara, essa
retailers,
turma.
and developers scratched their heads. Most developers were preparing for a fall launch, so there weren't that many games to buy. Meanwhile, Sony took the opportunity to cut the September launching PlayStation's price to $300, leaving the $400 Saturn to languish on the store shelves. Sega's 4-month head start resulted in a mere 80,000 units sold, while the much-hyped PlayStation sold over 100,000 units in its first weekend. All the while, Nintendo waited. Their own next-gen console, the Ultra 64, had been in development since 1993, but by 1995, it wasn't ready.
Cara, eu particularmente, cara, eu queria que a Nintendo lançasse o Nintendo 64 como Ultra, cara, 64, meu. Olha que nome imponente, cara, Ultra 64. Nintendo Ultra 64 ficaria muito foda, meu. Não sei por que ela não manteve, né, cara?
Yet. What was ready, however, was the Virtual Boy, a
Cara,
32-bit
um dia eu
portable
vou ter o
device
Virtual Boy,
that
cara. Eu
offered
quero
gamers
muito ter
full
esse
3D visuals,
videogame, cara.
and also completely red visuals. Gunpei Yokoi had been developing the device with his team since 1991. Throughout that time, the Game Boy inventor struggled with the Virtual Boy's design and was reluctant for it to go to market. According to Jeff Ryan's book Super Mario: How Nintendo Conquered America, Yokoi wanted to wait until including full-color visuals was more affordable. Nintendo's president, Hiroshi Yamauchi, however, wanted a new product on the market while the Ultra 64 matured. The Virtual Boy launched in the summer of 1995. It was quietly discontinued less than a year later, having only moved 770,000 units
Que é ruim de
worldwide.
conseguir comprar ele, é
The
muito
failure
pouca
made
unidade.
Yokoi a pariah within Nintendo. Yokoi helped develop the Game Boy Pocket, then retired from the company and began consulting. However, Nintendo would never benefit from Yokoi's genius again. In 1997, he was killed in a tragic car
Que
accident.
merda, né, meu?
It's not clear whether Nintendo's troubles
Ele
truly
tava depois à frente, junto com a Bandai, na produção do Wonderswan, né, cara? Ele chegou a lançar, eu quero ter esse portátil um dia, cara. Eu acho demais, cara, as ideias do Yokoi, cara.
began with Yokoi's departure, or if Yokoi's exit was merely a symptom of Nintendo's bigger problems. But when Nintendo released its next-generation console, now called the Nintendo 64, in 1996, it wasn't the dominating force its predecessors had been. The N64
mano,
launched
eu
to
todo
very
ano dou
strong
uma
sales.
pesquisadinha pra ver se eu
In
acho
4
algum
months in
Virtual
North
Boy
America,
baratinho, mas
it
é
sold
difícil, cara.
400,000
É sempre de 500
units,
conto pra cima.
far outstripping the Saturn's dismal performance. Its $200 launch price was a full $100 less than Sony's PlayStation, but the N64's affordability was diminished due to the high cost of its games, a whopping $70 per cartridge. Fortunately, one of the system's best-loved and most successful launch titles, Super Mario 64, was more than worth the price of admission. Nintendo's resident genius, Shigeru Miyamoto, had done it again, reinventing Mario in a way that was both brand new and comfortably familiar. For the first time, Mario existed in a deep, fully three-dimensional world, freed from the flat lands of 2D side-scrolling. Miyamoto had packed 13 enormous levels full of exploration, taking a page out of the Zelda playbook.
Deixa eu fazer uma pausa, um comentário. Desculpa eu estar parando direto aqui. Mas tu para pra analisar, né, meu? Já era um salto gigantesco, cara, do desenvolvimento de um jogo. É isso que a Nintendo, junto com o Miyamoto, era um diferencial absurdo. Já era um salto gigantesco, cara, de um jogo pro lado de um 2D para 3D, né? A grande maioria das empresas fariam isso. Simplesmente a transição, aplicariam uma mecânica simples e deu. O diferencial da Nintendo com seus jogos, isso vem muito do Miyamoto, que ele nunca se contenta com pouco. Além de ele transicionar perfeitamente o jogo pro universo 3D, ele implementou diversas mecânicas que se tornou padrão da indústria, cara. Então, cara, olha que absurdo, cara, o que é. Pega Mario 64 e joga hoje pra te ver. Tu não vai sentir nada, assim, tu vai jogar tranquilamente. Agora, por exemplo, pega um Resident Evil 1 e joga hoje comparando com os Resident Evil mais atuais, cara. É horrível, cara, tu te sente mal jogando o Resident Evil 1, cara. Quem nasceu na geração que não pegou a época de PlayStation 1, mais novo, não consegue jogar, cara, porque é muito ruim a gameplay, cara.
Players rooted through every nook and cranny in an effort to find all the stars and coins that they could. But Miyamoto's game was part of the reason the N64 was delayed a year. Originally, he'd wanted to include 40 levels in the game. In fact, some of the elements he couldn't fit into Super Mario 64 appeared in The Legend of Zelda: The Ocarina of Time, which was released 2 years later in 1998. Both games were considered masterpieces, as were many of the other first-party games Nintendo published. Star Fox 64 and Mario Kart 64 were enormous expansions of the original SNES titles, while new franchises like Super Smash Bros. And Mario Party found popularity of their own. And Rare, the studio behind the SNES Smash Donkey Kong Country, delivered another critical hit for the system in 1997. GoldenEye 007, which sold more than 8 million copies and offered what seemed impossible, a great first-person shooter on a console. GoldenEye paved the way for the torrent of console first-person shooters that have followed, and best of all, GoldenEye was an N64 exclusive. But amid Nintendo's successes, there was a critical piece of the puzzle missing: third parties. The reason? Cartridges. As game makers continued to up the ante with cinematic visuals and sound, it was apparent that CDs were the best medium for the job. They were inexpensive to manufacture and held tons of data. While cartridges could load more quickly, they held a fraction of the data discs. Sega and Sony understood the CD's benefits, while Nintendo only saw drawbacks, none more frightening than piracy. Developers didn't share Nintendo's fears and started pulling their support in search of easier development and higher profits. The avalanche started with Squaresoft, which had previously enjoyed a lucrative partnership with Nintendo on the SNES console. While the two companies had thrived together, Square was expanding its scope, and its next project, Final Fantasy VII, was shaping up to be epic. But such a large game would never fit on a cartridge. The choice for Square was clear. In 1997, Final Fantasy VII launched for the Sony PlayStation. The game was a monster hit, selling over 10 million copies, popularizing the RPG genre among American gamers, and making plenty of money for Sony. Soon, most third-party developers had flocked to the PlayStation, leaving Nintendo fans to wait for more appearances from Mario and the rest of the gang. Nintendo's stubbornness had finally taken its toll. When the smoke cleared, the N64 was certainly a very popular console, having sold 32.93 million units worldwide by the end of its life cycle. It had easily trounced longtime rival Sega, whose Saturn only ever sold 9.5 million units. But neither could touch the PlayStation, which sold over 102 million consoles worldwide, becoming the first video game console to break the 100 million mark. Nintendo was no longer number one, having been relegated to a distant second. And with the release of their next console, a distant second might have looked pretty good.
É bonito o GameCube, né, cara?
Tune in next time to see Nintendo box itself in. The 1990s concluded with Nintendo feeling triumph and defeat. Its N64 console easily trounced the Sega Saturn system in sales and popularity. But both systems had their clocks cleaned by the 100 million selling Sony PlayStation, a system that owed its existence to Nintendo having commissioned its creation, and Sony's thirst for revenge after Nintendo's backhanded business dealings. And while Nintendo's Super Mario 64 was hailed as nothing short of revolutionary, third-party developers had left for Sony's greener pastures, leaving the N64 with mostly first-party hits. As the new millennium approached, Nintendo would struggle to reclaim its status at the top of the industry, an industry that was getting pretty crowded. Soon, a fourth participant in the console war would enter the fray, leaving Nintendo feeling...
Cachista Piro. Estamos ali nos comentários. Fala, Santikill. Eu deixei na faixa de R$600 uma vez, mas na época não estava com renda fixa. Eita, nós. Valeu, Ricardo Albuquerque. Brigadão, cara. Obrigado pelo superchat aí, meu. Aquele super like. Valeu, cara. Brigadão, cara. Na época eu não conseguia jogar, não tinha a minha cidade, a Lan House, locadora. Primeira vez que eu joguei o GameCube, cara, foi numa locadora na praia, tá? Nós tava na praia, eu e meu irmão lá, e aí nós, olhando o locador, já vamos pra locadora já, né, cara? E eu olhei lá, o cara jogando Mario Sunshine, cara, nunca vou me esquecer, cara. E eu, nossa senhora, cara, aí já fui ali, botei na época... 50 centavos meia hora, um pilão real, botei 2 horas, cara. Fiquei jogando Mario Sunshine. Primeira vez que eu vi o GameCube na vida. E aí, depois, acho que 1 ano depois, um pouquinho mais, o meu irmão te vendeu um monte de videogame que tinha, que a gente colecionava já, né? E aí pegamos o GameCube. A gente ficou muito pouco tempo, por causa que meu irmão se enlouqueceu por um Play 2. E menos de 1 ano a gente vendeu o nosso GameCube pra comprar o Play 2, cara. Ó, o Bilef é o Bailef. É cachista, hein? Que filho?
A rosa.
Quer jogar Kirby, filho?
É a da bolinha.
Tava jogando aqui, cara. Super Dodgeball tava jogando. Pera aí que o pai vou botar aqui. Ó, senta lá pra jogar lá. Tava jogando um pouco de gol. Vai lá, senta lá. Senta lá, aqui, ó. Senta ali na cadeira ali, ó. Vamos lá.
While the
Eu vi o primeiro
N64
GameCube
wasn't
numa
a runaway
Blockbuster,
hit,
tinha um Luigi.
Nintendo maintained a firm
Eu vi
grip
uma
on the
locadora,
handheld
cara,
market with the
na praia.
8-bit Game Boy, thanks in large part to another trademark first-party franchise. But it wasn't Mario, Zelda, or even Donkey Kong. It was Pokemon, and it was a worldwide phenomenon. Pokemon was the brainchild of Satoshi Tajiri, who had learned the ways of simple yet addictive game design.
Satoshi
Pokemon was the
Tajiri me
brain...
põe a foto do Didi Mocó ali, É o Ishihara. Esqueci o nome dele, mas é o Ishihara. É mais conhecido como Didi Mocó aqui no canal.
Child of Satoshi
Didi
Tajiri,
Mocó
who
japonês.
had learned the ways of simple yet addictive game design from Nintendo's resident expert, Shigeru Miyamoto. Released in 1995 in Japan,
essa
Pokemon's
época,
premise
cara,
was summed up in its catchphrase.
eu
Gotta catch 'em
olhava
all.
as revistas, cara, e me
Players roamed the
enlouquecia
land searching
no
for
bundle
every
que
single
vinha
type of
do
over
Game Boy
100
Pocket
different Pokemon, battling rival trainers or collectors along
Pokémon
the way.
Red ou...
The kids of Japan took the slogan to
Blue.
heart, and within 2 years, Pokemon sold 10.4 million copies. It spawned an anime series as well, which made global headlines in 1997 when over 600 Japanese kids were admitted to hospitals after suffering seizures, apparently induced by a
Episódio do
Pokemon
Power
episode's
Ground.
flashing colors. The bizarre incident was...
Porra, cara, travou. É que eu vou voltar. Ah, merda, cara. Sei lá, eu tenho que ver o que é esse bug aí, cara. Aí, bora.
While the N64 wasn't a runaway hit, Nintendo maintained a firm grip on the handheld market with the 8-bit Game Boy, thanks in large part to another trademark first-party franchise.
Aproveitar que tem uma galerinha fazer a propaganda de novo, cara. Eu tô assistindo esse documentário. Ele foi traduzido completamente pelo Amauri do canal Nintendo Dreaming, cara. Eu conversei com ele e ele me permitiu pra mim assistir esse vídeo aí, desse trabalho que ele fez. Que até então esse documentário não era traduzido, cara. E ele teve toda essa dedicação em legendar e traduzir pra nós aí, cara. Então o link do canal dele tá aqui na descrição, entrem lá. Quem não conhece, dificilmente, acho que a galerinha que tá aqui no meu canal conhece o Amauri do Nintendo Dreaming lá. O conteúdo dele é show de bola, cara. Sempre fazendo live falando sobre Nintendo aí. Dê uma conferida lá, cara.
But it wasn't Mario, Zelda, or even Donkey Kong. It was Pokemon, and it was a worldwide phenomenon. Pokemon was the brainchild.
O azul. Meio. Todos.
Ah, tá, é do Game Boy Advance. Ele não quer esse Kirby do... Eu botei o Kirby do Super Nintendo pra ele. É o... da Amazing Mirror do Game Boy Advance. É o filho, vai.
Child of Satoshi Tajiri,
Ó, o
who
Didi
had learned
Mocó
the
ali.
ways of simple yet
Aquele não é o
addictive game
Satoshi
design
Tajiri,
from
cara. Aquele ali é
Nintendo's resident
o
expert,
Ishihara.
Shigeru Miyamoto. Released in 1995 in Japan, Pokemon's premise was summed up in its catchphrase, gotta catch 'em all. Players roamed the land searching for every single type of over 100 different Pokemon,
Só tu
battling
acha,
rival
ô,
trainers
Baile, que é a
or
pior
collectors
franquia.
along the way. The kids of Japan took the slogan to heart, and within 2 years, Pokemon sold 10.4 million copies. It spawned an anime series as well, which made global headlines in 1997 when over 600 Japanese kids were admitted to hospitals after suffering seizures, apparently induced by a Pokemon episode's flashing colors. The bizarre incident wasn't enough to keep Pokemon from reaching America in 1998. Just as they had dominated in Japan, the game and show found near instantaneous success in the United States and managed to sell almost 10 million copies. Even though Game Boy had been around for nearly a decade, the console flourished with a whole new generation of kids.
Propaganda muito
In
massa pra época.
1998, Nintendo finally released the Game Boy Color. 2 years later, Pokemon sequels transfixed kids again. But by 2001, the Game Boy had begun to show its age. Nintendo took the next step, releasing a 16-bit upgrade, the Game Boy Advance.
Golden
The
Sun.
first version of the console had survived for 12 years before it was replaced, and even hung around for another 2 years before finally racking up almost 120 million units sold.
Absurdo.
In the meantime, competitors had come and gone. The Game Gear, Lynx,
Coitado do Game
TurboGrafx
Gear.
Express, Neo Geo Pocket Color, and the Wonder Swan, a Bandai-made
Gunpei
system that owed
Yokoi.
its creation to Game Boy's own inventor,
Wonder
the
Swan.
late Gunpei Yokoi. All fell before the Game Boy's might. If only Nintendo's other video game ventures were so mighty. Meanwhile, Sega's newest console, the Dreamcast, was released in November 1998 to a tepid response in Japan. Its American launch in September of the following year, on the other hand, was a smash, selling over 500,000 consoles in just 2 weeks. Sega finally had another hit on its hands. Until, of course, Sony released its own next-gen console, the PlayStation 2, in 2000. Just as the first PlayStation wiped the floor with its competition, Sony's PS2 erupted onto the scene, moving nearly 1 million units in Japan in...
Como é que é? Sente que a Microsoft e Sony só estragaram esse mercado. Cara, eu não digo que elas estragaram o mercado. Na verdade, quem estragou o mercado foram os gamers, né? Porque elas entregaram o que a grande massa pede, né? Dos gamers. Gráfico, poder. Na verdade, ter mais consoles no mercado ajuda, porque faz as empresas se mexerem, né? Tem muita coisa que a Nintendo se mexeu aí por pressão da concorrência. Então, quanto mais concorrência no mercado, mais faz as empresas se mexerem para entregar algo diferenciado para nós, para chamar nossa atenção e fazer a gente comprar. Mas quem estragou lá no fundo, foram os gamers lá que pedem só poder gráfico. E a Nintendo se destaca nessa parada aí porque a preocupação da Nintendo não é entregar gráfico. A preocupação da Nintendo é entregar jogo bom. E é isso que tá mostrando com o Nintendo Switch, cara. Jogo bom.
In one day. The Dreamcast's one-year head start didn't matter. Third parties pulled Dreamcast support, flocking to the PS2.
A gata de novo, cara.
But by March 2001, Sega threw in the towel, announcing their exit from the console business to focus exclusively on software. In
Future
fact,
Rockets.
later that year,
Video
2
game
Sega
shop,
games
cara.
would be launch titles for Nintendo's newest console. But if consumers mourned the loss of Sega in 2001, they didn't grieve long. Nintendo's newest system, the GameCube, would launch on November 18th. And if that
Wavy
weren't
bird na
enough,
mão ali.
another tech giant was barging into the video game market to take Sega's place. Microsoft's Xbox was scheduled to launch a mere 3 days before the GameCube. The latest console war had begun. Sony's PlayStation 2 was the clear frontrunner, considering its growing catalog of hit
Metal
games
Gear,
after a
Sons
year on
of
the market,
Liberty.
a built-in DVD player, and its backwards compatibility with the original PlayStation's game library.
Crash.
The new challenger, Microsoft's Xbox, had plenty to offer as
Oh,
well,
baile feio,
like its own
pira.
DVD player, an internal hard drive, and an integrated Ethernet adapter for high-speed online gaming. The GameCube came in purple or black and had a little handle so you could
Bonito
carry
pra
it.
caramba. Que videogame
In many
bonito,
ways,
cara.
this was an unfair fight. Microsoft had the capital to brute force its way into the console market, a move Sony used a generation before with the PlayStation. Sony and Microsoft both had enough money pouring in through their other divisions to offset the costs of entering the video game market cold. Even selling feature-packed consoles at a loss was manageable for Nintendo's competitors. Nintendo, by contrast, made only games. How could it hope to compete against two big-spending tech giants with virtually unlimited wallets? The GameCube's North American launch still managed to impress, however. Priced $100 lower than the competition, the GameCube moved over 500,000 units in its first week on shelves. But Microsoft kept pace with Nintendo. The Xbox sold out of its supply of 300,000 units after its first week. When it came to playing actual games, not DVDs, the GameCube was on a pretty level playing field with the PlayStation 2 and Xbox. And having learned how toxic cartridges had become to developers, Nintendo made the switch to discs. While the Xbox and PS2 ran on full-size 12cm CDs and DVDs, with capacity upwards of 8.5 gigabytes of data, Nintendo commissioned Panasonic to create special proprietary mini DVD discs. Like the N64 cartridges, the mini DVD format was company president Hiroshi Yamauchi's solution for foiling would-be game pirates. The discs measured at 8 centimeters, but only offered 1.5 gigabytes of data capacity. For many game makers, this was plenty of space. But for developers pushing the generation's technical limits, the mini DVD presented problems. Bigger games required more than one disc to play, and some cross-platform titles required video and audio to be more compressed, or for some features to be omitted from the GameCube ports entirely. While these technical limitations may not have been enough to doom the console, the actual system's physical design seemed a clear signal to gamers. The purple cube, the lunchbox handle, the bizarre controller with bean-shaped buttons, and the baby-sized game discs signified that Nintendo wasn't making real games for real gamers. Nintendo had reinforced its
Besteira.
reputation as safe, kid-friendly, and extremely uncool. Of course, the GameCube still boasted some amazing titles that couldn't be found anywhere
Metroid
else.
Prime.
At launch, LucasArts and Factor 5 offered up Star Wars Rogue Leader, a space combat game set around the classic Star Wars trilogy that blew gamers away with fantastic visuals and top-notch action. A few weeks after GameCube's launch, Nintendo
Pikmin.
released its latest Shigeru Miyamoto title, a new real-time strategy franchise called Pikmin. It quickly established itself as a Nintendo staple, selling over 1 million copies. A month after the console's launch, Nintendo released Super
Melee.
Smash Bros. Melee, the sequel to its homegrown fighter that pitted its trademark characters in 4-way combat. Melee became the GameCube's best-selling title with over 7 million copies. And in 2002, Nintendo ported a late-cycle Japanese N64 game, Animal Crossing, to the GameCube, a decision that won tons of critical praise and establishing yet another lucrative franchise
É um
for
porte
the company's family
do
of
64,
consoles.
né?
And in
Do Animal
2002,
Crossing,
Nintendo released
na
Metroid
verdade, foi
Prime, a
projetado pro
radical
64 D&D.
reworking of Gunpei Yokoi's side-scrolling franchise. Created by Retro Studios, a second-party developer in Austin, Texas, Metroid Prime helped combat Nintendo's kids-only vibe by reinventing the
Eu tenho que vir
series as
Metroid
a
Trilogy
thrilling
uma vez,
first-person
cara.
shooter.
Metroid Prime
The new
Trilogy.
direction was a critical hit, feeling at once familiar and utterly brand new. Prime is remembered as one of the best, most highly praised games of the generation. But there were glaring omissions from the GameCube's lineup. For one, where was Mario? For the first time ever, Nintendo's home console didn't have a game featuring Mario at launch. What consumers got
Famoso
instead
Mario
was
128.
Luigi's Mansion, which ditched the running, jumping, and stomping. In their place was a vacuum cleaner that sucked ghosts. But despite praise from critics, longtime Nintendo fans thought that the vacuum wasn't all that sucked about Luigi's Mansion. Mario did finally get his own game about a half a year later. Super Mario Sunshine was released in summer 2002, and, like Luigi's Mansion, gave Mario a contraption that augmented the
Flooch.
familiar mechanics fans had grown to love. Instead of a ghost-sucking vacuum, Mario had a water-spraying hose, with which he cleaned up graffiti on a tropical island. Once again, critics praised
fino.
Super Mario Sunshine, but some wondered why Nintendo was gussing up their mascots with all the gimmicky gadgets. Other longtime Nintendo franchises got similarly reworked, pushing hardcore gamers away in
Eu tenho
droves.
vontade de jogar Star Fox
Star
aí, cara.
Fox
Nunca
Adventures
joguei
in
Star Fox
2002
Adventure.
was a third-person action game, bringing Fox McCloud out of the stars and onto the ground. Though developed by Nintendo's hitmaker Rare, Star Fox Adventures didn't have nearly the impact of Donkey Kong Country and GoldenEye 007. Even worse, Microsoft shelled out a cool $375 million to purchase Rare outright, a mere one day after Star Fox Adventures' North American release. That wasn't all, though. When the new installment of Miyamoto's other long-running franchise was unveiled, many fans considered it the final nail in the coffin. In 2003, Nintendo released The Legend of Zelda: The Wind Waker.
Coitado
It
da
was as
bobadinha
good a
da
Zelda game as any, if not the best one yet. But visually, Wind Waker once again reinforced claims that the GameCube was merely a toy. Link and the Kingdom of Hyrule were rendered in cel-shaded style, a visual effect that made games look like interactive cartoons.
Que jogo
The
lindo, cara.
revelation was made worse by the fact that in 2000, Nintendo showed off a demo reel featuring a dark
Ah,
and gritty
demo da
version of
época.
Zelda. Wind Waker was a hit among critics and fans who remained loyal to Nintendo,
Que veio a se
selling
tornar o Night
4.6
Princess
million
depois, né?
copies. But if the company was trying to fight its family's first image, this didn't help. In the end, the GameCube wasn't a failure for Nintendo, but it was the closest the company had come to defeat since entering the video game market 2 decades earlier. The PlayStation 2 was the unquestionable king of the hill, having sold 141 million units worldwide, though the final tally for the Xbox and the GameCube revealed that they finished neck and neck. The Xbox still beat out the industry veteran, selling 24 million to Nintendo's 22 million. Nintendo had slipped from its second-place status to a dismal third. Some believed this was the end of Nintendo's console-making days. Why not leave consoles to the big boys? Why not just make great games for other systems, like Sega was doing? The argument made a certain sense. But on the other hand, Nintendo's successes came by following its own path. No, the secret to reclaiming success wasn't as elusive as it seemed. For its next console, Nintendo would take its cues from the consumers it sought to reclaim. If you don't like what you're playing, there's one simple solution: change the game. Tune in next time for Nintendo's Revolution.
Nintendo Revolution. Eu também, cara. Eu gosto de Zelda cartunesco, assim, cara. Eu não gosto muito do
All
Zelda
was not well in the house of
realista,
Mario.
entre aspas.
Nintendo's latest home video game console, the GameCube, failed to find the same kind of dominance the company had enjoyed in the 80s and early 90s. While the company's name was once synonymous with video games, Nintendo's missteps and inability to change with the times had left it with a battered reputation. It was seen as out of touch and geared only towards Pokemon-loving kids. Gamers who consider themselves serious or hardcore turned their noses up at Nintendo's offering, and the result was a severely reduced market share. Their one-time rival Sega left the console business altogether to focus on software, a business shift many critics thought Nintendo should follow. But reinvention was a part of Nintendo's DNA. Though it may have had a tin ear when it came to listening to fans, Nintendo always heard the beat of its own drummer loud and clear. Soon, the company would outsell its competition and find its way back into the good graces and living rooms of gamers the world over.
Music. São 256 milhões Google Weather Charts.
Hiroshi Yamauchi had been the president of Nintendo since 1949, molding and shaping the company for more than half a century. Under Yamauchi's leadership, Nintendo grew from a regionally successful playing card company into a global entertainment powerhouse. But shortly after the GameCube's 2001 launch, Yamauchi knew it was time to step down. His son-in-law, Minoru Arakawa, retired as president of Nintendo of America in 2002. Though many thought Arakawa would succeed his father-in-law, it seemed the former Nintendo of America president was happy to leave the industry altogether after 22 years. These two men shaped Nintendo's two-decade transformation, and whoever followed would have their work cut out for them. By 2002, the GameCube was running third in the latest console war, beaten in worldwide sales by Sony's PlayStation 2 and Microsoft's first video game effort, the Xbox. For the vacancy to the top of Nintendo of America, Yamauchi appointed Tatsumi Kimishima, the former head of the company's Pokemon division, though Tatsumi would be supplanted by Reggie Fils-Aimé a mere 4 years later. For his own replacement, Yamauchi appointed Satoru Iwata, the president of Nintendo's second-party developer, HAL Laboratories. Since acquiring a majority stake in the studio, Nintendo enjoyed a healthy relationship with HAL, which was responsible for some of Nintendo's biggest franchise successes. Kirby, Earthbound, and Super Smash Bros. All came from HAL Laboratories, and proved to be worthy additions to Nintendo's lineup. In 2000, Yamauchi brought Iwata over from HAL to become Nintendo's head of corporate planning. Unbeknownst to Iwata, Yamauchi had hired him to see if he could be a worthy successor. In 2002, after stepping down as president, but staying on as chairman of Nintendo's board of directors, Yamauchi kept a close watch on Iwata to see if he was right. Iwata's first true test came in November 2004. The company was rolling out a new twist on an old favorite, the handheld DS console. Standing for dual screen, the DS took its design cues from a popular iteration of Gunpei Yokoi's old Game & Watch LCD toys, which featured two screens packaged in a hinged clamshell design. But instead of simply giving players a case of double vision, the DS's bottom half was actually a touchscreen. This opened the door for developers to create all new ways to interact with games, an innovation devised by Yamauchi before his exit. The DS included a Wi-Fi adapter, meaning that gamers could play online and even browse the web at Wi-Fi hotspots. After years of flirting with online connectivity with the original Famicom, the SNES's Japan-only Satellaview, and the limited GameCube broadband adapter, Nintendo finally went all in. The DS's solid core of features and its new wave of casual-minded games, like Shigeru Miyamoto's smash hit Nintendogs, helped make the DS a tremendous success among longtime gamers, businessmen with time to kill, and, most significantly, girls and women. It proved to be a true success.
Cara, a primeira vez que eu vi um Nintendo DS na vida, nós estávamos numa excursão da escola, tá? E nós tínhamos no shopping ver... Agora não vou me lembrar. Eu não sei se foi... Acho que foi A Paixão de Cristo, cara. Ou O Alto da Compadecida. Foi um desses dois filmes que a gente foi ver no cinema. Com a escola. Meu esposo deve estar dormindo. Ô, amor. Não te lembra aquele filme que a gente foi ver no cinema? Que a gente não namorava ainda? Tu ficou lá com a Rossana, dando risada. Era Paixão de Cristo ou era Alto da Compadecida? Dois filhos de Francisco, nenhum dos dois. Foi os dois filhos de Francisco, cara. Nós tínhamos ido ver no cinema e nós tava andando no shopping lá, né, cara? E aí a minha esposa era de uma outra turma, né? Ela tava no primeiro ano e eu já tava no segundo ano. E aí nós tava indo lá, tinha uma loja que tinha, cara, e eu pedi pra testar o Nintendo DS lá, e bem faceiro testando, coisa assim, meu Deus, Nintendo DS, cara, que massa, isso aqui e tudo mais. E tinha um colega da minha esposa, o nome dele era William, que ele era japonês, e a família dele, a parte da família dele morava no Japão, e os pais dele estavam aqui no Brasil, né? Aí nós lá testando isso aqui, ele chegou assim, o Nintendo DS, tu viu só que massa o Nintendo DS? Assim, eu tenho um. A família dele tinha mandado pra ele já, cara. E eu, puta merda, que desgraçado, cara. Vambora.
Successor to the Game Boy brand's legacy. Despite competition from Sony's handheld 2005's PSP, the DS has sold over 152 million units worldwide to date. But dominating the handheld market was simply Nintendo maintaining the status quo. After all, the Game Boy managed to last for over 12 years with barely a threat to its place in gamers' pockets. The true battle for video game supremacy was being waged at home. In the fall of 2005, Microsoft launched its second console, the Xbox 360, selling out initial shipments due to overwhelming consumer demand. Sony, which had gotten a year's head start with the PlayStation 2 to dominating effect, was planning to release the PlayStation 3 in November 2006. Meanwhile, Nintendo would be launching its own new console, codenamed the Revolution, a few days after that. History, it seemed, would be repeating itself. And even worse, as gamers and journalists learned more details about the console, its simple remote, its gimmicky motion controls, and its baffling new name, the Wii, the reaction wasn't revolution, but confusion. But as the Wii's release date drew near, excitement about Nintendo's new console began to grow among the gaming media. The system promised a brand new way to play video games, a claim Nintendo had already fulfilled once with the DS and its unique touchscreen. While Microsoft and Sony pushed the technological envelope in terms of audio-visual spectacle, the Wii stripped the gaming experience down to basics. Every console generation to this point seemed to slap more buttons and analog sticks onto an increasingly convoluted controller. The idea of actually playing a game was lost amid the complexity. Speaking of complex, Sony's PlayStation 3 was suffering for the reasons its predecessor had excelled. The system didn't just play games and DVDs, it included an expensive built-in Blu-ray player and online connectivity. Its beefy hardware specs were powerful and impressive, but resulted in sticker shock, costing $499 for the most basic model. The Wii was puny by comparison, but with an equally puny price of $249 to match, not to mention always-on Wi-Fi capability of its own. The Wii also boasted backwards compatibility with the GameCube's library, as well as a robust online store full of classic titles from its earlier systems, not to mention plenty of games from the Sega Genesis and NEC's TurboGrafx-16. Though its online gaming options weren't nearly as sophisticated as those found in the PS3 and the Xbox 360, the Wii offered enough bells and whistles for the casual gamers just looking to have fun. By the time the Wii and the PS3 launched in November 2006, people had received Nintendo's message loud and clear. The Wii sold out immediately and became that year's hottest holiday gift. For months after its release, the Wii was difficult to find all around the world, despite the company manufacturing 1.6 million units a month throughout 2007. By 2008, Nintendo began manufacturing 2.4 million units a month in an effort to keep up with how quickly the system was selling out worldwide. Nintendo was simply unable to meet the overwhelming demand that had emerged for the console, which was finding its place in living rooms and senior rec centers all around the country. The Wii was being touted by the media as a new way to stay active and healthy, somewhat dubious claims Nintendo never promised, but never dispelled either. By September 2007, not even a year after its release, the Wii overtook the Xbox 360 in worldwide sales, boasting 9 million units sold to Microsoft's 8.9 million. Meanwhile, the PS3 lived up to its name, taking third place with 3.7 million units sold. The Wii had quickly turned Nintendo's fortunes around, transforming what was once perceived as Nintendo's weakness, an emphasis on family fun, into its strength. Anyone could pick up a Wii remote and figure out how to play. The concept was best illustrated in the Wii's pack-in title, Wii Sports, which featured 5 different motion-controlled, sports-inspired minigames, ranging from bowling to boxing to baseball. To swing the bat, all you had to do was
Era
swing the
muito bom em
remote.
esportes.
To return a serve in tennis, just do your best Serena Williams impression. These were video games people could understand intuitively, no complicated instructions required. Wii Sports was so successful that it broke the record for highest-selling video game of all time, a title previously held by Super Mario Bros., for 18 years. To date, Wii Sports has sold nearly 80 million copies. But while the Wii was undoubtedly a hit with a newly emerging class of casual gamer, many hardcore gamers were placated with another launch title, The Legend of Zelda: Twilight Princess. Finally, Nintendo made good on its long unfulfilled promise of a more mature Zelda. It also featured motion controls for attacks. The innovative controls were a hit, and Twilight Princess sold 5.8 million copies by 2011, earning several Game of the Year awards. Was Nintendo just for kids and moms?
Muito massa
Hardly.
pescar.
Mario took his time showing up on the Wii, finally appearing in Super
Melhor
Mario
Mario de
Galaxy
todos, cara.
a year after the
3D.
system's launch.
É o Mario
But it
Galaxy
was
pra
worth
mim.
the
Que
wait.
jogo incrível. cara.
Galaxy was an instant smash. Like Super Mario 64 had done before it, Galaxy brought a new and exciting gameplay mechanic to the franchise. The action was set in space on small, interconnected planets, each with their own gravitational pulls. And best of all, there wasn't a water hose in sight. Super Mario Galaxy sold over 10 million copies by March 2012 and earned several Game of the Year awards in
Cara, eu
2007.
paguei um absurdo
But
de
as
caro nesse
popular as
jogo.
the
Eu
Wii
paguei
had become
200
with
conto
gamers and
na
old
época.
folks alike,
É,
developers
a loja
weren't
da minha
all quite as
esposa, que era uma
enamored.
loja de roupa,
As the
abriu uma
system matured,
seçãozinha
it became
pequena de
clear that
brinquedo de
only
videogame.
Nintendo fully
E aí,
understood the
pá,
secret
namorava na
recipe that
época,
made
né?
the
Pra
Wii
agradar,
so
eu comprei
appealing.
lá, cara.
Many
Paguei 200
third-party
conto na
games
época. Na época,
couldn't
o jogo era
figure out
100
how to
pila, 100 e
successfully
poucos
utilize
pilas,
the
o cara
console's
achava nas
motion
lojas.
controls. Other games didn't even bother, and the Wii was plagued with endless shovelware
Eu
and
tenho ele guardado
half-baked,
ainda ali.
underpowered ports of other titles.
Esse eu não vendi na
One
nos meus jogos que
developer
eu tinha
working
do
at
Wii.
EA famously announced at the Game Developers Conference in 2007 that the Wii was nothing more than, quote, 2 GameCubes stuck together with duct tape.
Uma bundão.
But no matter how
Deixa eu até
upset
ver isso aí de
developer then,
novo.
quote, announced at the Game Developers of other titles. And the Wii was plagued with endless shovelware and half-baked, underpowered ports of other titles. One developer working at EA famously announced at the Game Developers Conference in 2007 that the Wii
Da EA,
was
né?
nothing more than, quote, 2 GameCubes stuck together with duct tape. But no matter how upset developers might have been, the numbers didn't lie. By September 2012, the Wii had sold 97.18 million units, while the PS3 and Xbox 360 were neck and neck
Congelou,
with
que merda, cara. Ah, cara, eu acho que eu sei quando congela, cara. Eu acho que é quando eu mexo na timeline do vídeo, eu acho. Onde é que tá? Deixa eu ver aqui.
Other games didn't even bother, and the Wii was plagued with endless shovelware and half-baked, underpowered ports of other titles. One developer working at EA
Feito, Nerd
famously
Profeta,
announced
quase
at the Game
acabando,
Developers
cara.
Conference in 2007 that the Wii was nothing more
terminando.
than, quote, 2 GameCubes stuck together with duct tape. But no matter how upset developers might have been, the numbers didn't lie. By September 2012, the Wii had sold 97.18 million units, while the PS3 and Xbox 360 were neck and neck with roughly 70 million units sold for each. The system was a hit, and Nintendo was back on top. The Wii never
Emotion
could
Plus.
stand up to the horsepower of the Xbox 360 and PS3, but neither competitor could boast the Wii's intuitive and unique motion controls, though they tried. In 2010, both Sony and Microsoft launched their own takes on the Wii's motion-based gaming, the PlayStation Move and the Xbox
Ditando regra
Kinect.
no mercado.
Once again, Nintendo had transformed the industry, and its rivals were scrambling to keep up. Nintendo was king of the hill once more. After 5 years of enjoying its reclaimed market dominance, the company planned to wow the world again with its latest device, a
DS.
giant leap in handheld gaming technology over its wildly successful DS console. What could go wrong? In a word, everything. Tune in next time for Nintendo to start seeing red. The Wii was
O O 3DS, cara, eu comprei com o meu primeiro PPR não, com o meu segundo PPR da empresa. Eu caminhei acho que umas 5, 6 horas, cara, em Porto Alegre pra comprar, pra achar uma loja vendendo. E eu fui achar dentro de uma galeria, cara, o cara vendendo o Nintendo 3DS. O meu é o embaixador, aquele. É o primeirãozão, pretão. Deixa eu ver se eu... Carinha. Carinha aqui, ó. Tinha um azul e o preto, eu preferi o preto. Eu achei mais bonito o preto, cara. O jogo tá aqui. Ah, tá, meu Pokémon White aqui, ó. Gosto demais, cara, desse carinha aqui. Já tá terminando já, mano. Aí. Show de bola, mano. É raridade, hein? Isso aqui não é pra qualquer um, hein? Não consegui ver. Certificado de embaixador.
A return to form for Nintendo, rocketing the company straight to the top of the video game market. It easily outpaced the competition in sales, racking up nearly 100 million in console sales over the course of 6 years. It also featured some of the company's most exciting and innovative.
Doou o áudio ou impressão minha? Deixa eu ver o retorno aqui, peraí. Uma impressão minha.
First-party games yet. But for every great Nintendo-made Wii game, there were at least 3 forgettable third-party titles. The system was plagued with inferior ports, low-selling exclusives, or straight-up shovelware. Nintendo had captured the hearts and living rooms of families around the globe, while the Wii left a bad taste in the mouths of so-called real video
Fala
gamers.
disso, Duda.
So how could Nintendo keep the casual audience it had won with the Wii,
Pô,
but
cara.
recapture the hardcore gamers who
Merda.
felt buyers Wii
Ah, tá
remorse?
louco, meu
Could the two
xodó ali,
factions
cara.
come together once more?
Ó, o Yu.
Even before Nintendo's success with the Wii console, the company had dominated the handheld market for 2 decades. The Game Boy was the champion of mobile gaming for over 10 years, while the Game Boy Advance and DS systems kept Nintendo's hot streak alive. So when its next handheld gaming system was unveiled at E3 in 2010, it seemed like a surefire winner. The 3DS was exactly what it sounded like, a more powerful version of the DS console with 3D visuals, without the use of annoying glasses. A year before, in 2009, James Cameron's big-budget spectacle Avatar had ushered in a frenzy of interest in 3D movies and television. Electronics manufacturers cranked out 3D-capable TVs, while blockbuster movies were converted for 3D screenings. The 3DS's promise of glasses-free
Esse é
3D
demais,
visuals
cara.
seemed like the perfect
Bigodinho,
gadget at the
bigodinho.
perfect time. When the system launched in the spring of 2011, it seemed as though Nintendo had done it again. The 3DS sold out of its initial shipment of 400,000 during its release in Japan. Nintendo of America announced that the 3DS's US launch had set a record for the highest first-day sales of any of the company's previous devices. But soon after,
Ele ali
interest in the 3DS
é um
slowed
jogador
to a
competitivo
crawl.
de Smash, cara.
Nintendo had hoped
Cara
to
aqui,
ship
ó.
soon after highest first-day.
Como é que é o nome dele, cara? Ele tem canal no YouTube também, mas ele é um jogador competitivo de Smash, cara. Esqueci o nome dele.
Sales of any of the company's previous devices. But soon after, interest in the 3DS slowed to a crawl. Nintendo had hoped to ship at
Feito,
least 4
Believe.
million
Já tá quase
consoles by
acabando
the
já,
end of
cara.
March, but fell short with only 3.61 million.
Falta 10 minutinhos.
By June, sales in Japan finally crossed the 1 million mark, a shocking reversal of fortune considering the DS had managed the feat in a mere 4 weeks. Only a few months after its launch, developers were announcing delays for their 3DS games, citing slow system sales. What had gone wrong? To start, Nintendo overestimated the public's hunger for a 3D-enabled gaming system. The 3DS's high launch price of $250 didn't help either. And despite promises of three-dimensional romps through familiar Nintendo titles, there were only 3 first-party launch games: Pilot Wings Resort, Steel Diver, and Nintendogs and
Diver é
Cats.
muito bom, cara.
But above all, there was one unseen factor that stalled the 3DS's sales: the iPhone. Apple's take on smartphones revolutionized the mobile technology industry. Sure, in the mid-2000s, everyone had a cell phone, but they also had separate MP3 players, GPS navigators, cameras, and gaming machines. When the iPhone hit in 2007, it sent shockwaves through the tech world, condensing all those devices and more into one sleek, fashionable gadget. Smartphones weren't for businessmen anymore. They were for everyone. And Apple's secret weapon? The App Store, full of colorful, addictive
Mas não
games
pode agora,
ranging in
filho.
price from $3 to $1 to flat out
Que
free.
legal.
Who needed Mario when you could play Angry Birds on the bus? While the 3DS was a huge leap
Senta
forward
lá
for
pra jogar.
Nintendo's
Senta no chão.
handhelds,
Vai.
its $40 games and inability to make phone calls made it seem like a throwback. With the 3DS stalling out only months after its launch, suddenly Nintendo's success with the Wii appeared less like a return to form and more like a temporary fluke. Once again, critics, analysts, and even Nintendo's investors pressured Nintendo to leave the hardware game and bring Mario and Pokemon to mobile phones. Once again, Nintendo went its own way, but not before taking some drastic steps. In July 2011, Nintendo announced a dramatic 3DS price cut, dropping over 30% from $250 to $170 after only 5 months on the market.
170.
Even worse, the slow sales forced Nintendo to cut that year's profit projections by over 80%. The announcement caused Nintendo's stock price to tumble 12% on July 29th.
Foi onde o Iwata
Former
cortou o
Nintendo
próprio salário,
president
cara.
Hiroshi Yamauchi, the company's
Pra que
largest
nenhum-
stockholder, lost over
Nenhum
$300
funcionário fosse
million
demitido
in
na
one day.
Nintendo, o Iwata foi
Nothing like
e
this had
cortou o
ever
próprio salário.
happened during his half-century as president. His successor, Satoru Iwata, took full responsibility for the dire turn of events, giving himself a 50% pay cut.
Tá
To
louco.
many, this looked like the end.
Ah, esse cara é foda, velho.
Amazingly, though, it wasn't. When it was first announced, the price cut looked like a desperate move to temporarily delay Nintendo's imminent collapse. But sales of the 3DS actually did begin to climb. Soon, first-party games like Mario
Mario
Kart
Kart
7,
7.
Super Mario 3D Land, and Kid Icarus Uprising started to appear. Delayed third-party games made their way to stores as 3DS ownership grew across the world. By September 2012, the 3DS's sales had reached 22.19 million,
Pior que eu não sei,
keeping
ô
close
Raihiro.
pace with the sales of its predecessor for the same period of time. It turned out that people were perfectly happy with Mario staying off the iPhone, as long as the price
Tem
was
esquema
right.
de calibração nas
Meanwhile,
configurações do
Sony
Wii,
followed
cara.
up
Dá
its
uma olhada lá.
PSP in early 2012 with the PlayStation Vita. Like the 3DS, its first few months on the market were rough, but unlike the 3DS, its $250 plus price tag remained the same, spending the majority of its first year struggling to find its audience. Even still, the damage to Nintendo was done. It ended its fiscal year 2011 with its first ever full year loss. While it would be easy to blame the 3DS's slow start and the money lost in its price cut, the reality wasn't so simple. External factors like Japan's back-to-back
Tá,
natural
filho, depois que acabar
disasters
desliga.
and an
Senta lá.
unusually strong yen to dollar amplified Nintendo's financial woes. But the point had been made. Nintendo could still sell a handheld system, even in the face of Apple's unstoppable iPhone. So, could it sell a home
Vamos
console
lá.
to casual fans and hardcore gamers at the same time? To find out, Nintendo devised a follow-up to its mega-popular Wii console called the Wii U. First unveiled during E3 2011, the Wii U finally brought high-definition visuals to Nintendo's games. And it utilized one of the company's more successful
a
innovations,
Nintendo entrou no
the dual
Full HD.
screen and touch control dynamics from the DS handheld. The Wii U also took advantage of its predecessor's huge install base, including backwards compatibility with not only Wii games, but also Wii remotes. But that wasn't all. The gamepad featured traditional button layouts, 2 analog sticks, built-in accelerometers, a microphone, a front-facing camera, speakers.
Já tudo no
It seemed like
gamepad,
the new
cara.
device promised to do everything but your taxes. The HD visuals represented Nintendo embracing the future. The Wii compatibility represented Nintendo's commitment to casual gamers and families. But the gamepad? That was a mystery. The Wii U's announcement wasn't embraced with the enthusiasm that Nintendo needed. Journalists were mystified by what they saw, a result of the console's physical similarities to the original Wii. The new name didn't help. Was the Wii U just an add-on for the Wii? Did the gamepad connect with the old system? What kind of leap forward was a touchscreen controller anyway? Investors were similarly nonplussed. Nintendo's stock dipped nearly 10% 2 days after the Wii U's
O
E3
marketing do
debut.
Wii U foi muito mal
While the company's
planejado,
fortunes
cara.
improved over the next few months with the 3DS price cut, the Wii U remained a question mark in the year leading up to the console's late 2012 release. But as journalists had a chance to try out the new system, many started singing its praises. The Wii U's potential to transform video games, new dynamics between players, immersive interactive
Nintendo
mechanics,
Land é muito
started to
bom,
seem
cara.
less
Como eu
like
queria que
promises
tivesse
and
Nintendo
more like
Land
reality.
no
The
no
opinion
Switch,
among
cara.
developers remained divided, however.
Scribble
Some
now.
derided the new system in its current-gen visual and processing specs. Other developers, though, were fully on board. Ubisoft was releasing Wii U exclusive titles like Zombie U and Rayman Legends that seemed to take full advantage of the gamepad. And Gearbox Software's Randy Pitchford said, quote, "This is the best controller Nintendo's ever made for making an FPS. This is the best controller Nintendo has ever given us for playing hardcore games." The Wii U was released in North America on November 18th, 2012, selling out of its initial shipment of 400,000 units in its first week on the shelves. By all accounts, the Wii U
Olha ele
would
de
be
novo aí,
another
ó.
hit. But then, the
Ele
original
é,
Wii and
ele tem
3DS
canal no
both
YouTube
enjoyed red-hot launches
e é
with
jogador
deeply
competitivo de
divergent
Smash, se não me engano.
results. It's not yet clear what the
Mint
future holds for
Free,
the
eu não me
Wii
lembro o
U.
nome dele.
With its price starting at $300, Nintendo is selling the console at a loss, another first for the company. Though Nintendo of America president Reggie Fils-Aimé claimed that the sale of a console and one game made the device profitable. By the end of 2012, Nintendo's future seemed unclear. The 3DS was at the top of the handheld market, and for the first time since the launch of the original Nintendo Entertainment System, the company was first to market with a next-generation console. Will the Wii U be another Dreamcast, destined to enjoy a brief victory before getting crushed under the
É
competition?
sempre querendo que
Or
a
has
Nintendo
Nintendo
se
once again
foda, né,
changed
meu?
the game industry into something new and unpredictable? Looking at Nintendo's competition did offer up some clues about its impact on the industry. In 2012, Microsoft introduced Smart Glass, an app designed to integrate gamers' smartphones and tablets with the aging Xbox 360 hardware. Similarly, Sony began talking up the cross-platform functionality between the Vita and the PS3. Like the Wii having inspired the Kinect and PS Move, it seemed as though Nintendo's Wii U encouraged its rivals to imitate its innovations once again. No matter what happens with the Wii U, Nintendo has had a greater influence on the video games industry than any other company before or since it entered the industry.
Nintendo é a base de videogame, né, cara?
Nintendo's
Nintendo
first home
é a
console created
representação
a
de
business
videogame,
model
né,
the
cara?
industry has embraced and internalized. And though it didn't
É
invent the
sinônimo,
video
né?
game medium, Nintendo perfected it. And the games it creates blaze trails of innovation and creativity that have never been matched. The proof is in the record books. Super Mario Bros. Held the record for the highest-selling video game of all time for a staggering 18 years. And when the record did finally fall, it was due to, what else? Another Nintendo game, Wii Sports. From its humble beginnings as a playing card manufacturer in Kyoto over 100 years ago, to its status today as a worldwide symbol of games and fun, Nintendo will undoubtedly find a way to live on for generations to come. Super Mario, Link, Pokemon, and the rest aren't merely mascots for a video game company. They're modern icons that represent new realms of excitement to explore. For over 30 years in the video game market, Nintendo has left luck to heaven, and will likely never stop making plenty of luck on its own.
Acabou! Acabou! Eu quero ver aqui com vocês aqui, ó. Quero ver aqui com vocês também agora. A história dos videogames, ó. Só que não hoje, ó. Acho que semana que vem. O que vocês acham aí, gurizada? Nós curtir aí a história dos videogames semana que vem. Qual o vídeo, ô, Gabriel Lopes? Logo, logo a Sony vai querer fazer um parque. Não duvido nada, cara. Beleza, manda lá. Edson do e agora, Colvara, que esperar a Nintendo frente à nova geração. Cara, a Nintendo ela vai manter o jogo com Switch, tá? Segue ainda aquilo que eu falei pra você, venho falando desde o ano passado. Fala, Enterprise! Próximo vai ser explicar como o Switch foi o primeiro console a chegar a 150k. Não duvido, hein, Enterprise? Não duvido, cara. A Nintendo, cara, ela vai manter o jogo com o Switch até 2023, tá? Talvez em 2022 a gente veja algum trailer do próximo console dela, que eu não acredito, acho que só em 2023. O lançamento em 2024 pra 2025, tá? Então, cara, a Nintendo ela vai seguir frente ao lançamento do PlayStation 5 e o Xbox Series X, como ela vem fazendo sempre. Jogos. A Nintendo tem muito jogo na manga ainda, cara. Muito jogo na manga pra ser lançado no Switch. Ela não vai desperdiçar o sucesso que é o Nintendo Switch pra segurar jogo. Ela não vai. A Nintendo, como ela iniciou o marketing do Switch dizendo que o Switch é a união de todos os consoles da Nintendo em um só. Você se lembra aquele trailer de apresentação da Nintendo? A Nintendo vai trazer praticamente, acho que quase todas as grandes franquias dela pro Switch. Então, cara, podem saber que esse início de geração que a galera, meu Deus, agora PlayStation 5, cara, o Switch vai se manter um sucesso, cara, por causa dos jogos. E por causa da proposta com o console que já entrou na boca do povo. A galera abraçou, cara, a proposta do Switch. Hiro Colvara, acho que o LED azul do meu Wii queimou, não acende mais quando ligo. Que aleatório na minha parte. Ah, cara, que pena, meu. Tu ligou fora de estabilizador ou coisa assim, cara? Cara, o primeiro jogo da Nintendo enfrenta um console. Olha o poder da empresa. Cara, é o que determina, né, cara? Jogos. Vou aumentar aqui minha coisa de novo. Então, isso aí, gurizadinha. O que vocês acham aí? Semana que vem te curti aí a história do videogame. Eu achei legal essa ideia do DK ali de assistir filme com a galera, mas cara, eu acho legal trazer pro canal coisas relacionadas a games, né, meu? E aí, acho que tá valendo, né? A gente assistir semana que vem a história dos games aí. Ver o que eles vão falar da Nintendo. Esse documentário eu não assisti, cara. Eu quero que a Nintendo faça com o Switch como fez com o 3DS, que abaixe o preço e ainda lança um monte de. É que não vai baixar o preço, ô Afonso, porque o Switch de baixo custo é o Switch Lite. Considerar 3DS, console 150 milhões dos consoles mais vendidos. É, esse do Discovery eu não vi não, Neto. Tem um que é do Netflix que tem ali, mas aquele ali acho que dá strike, cara. Esses mais antigos eu acho que não dão strike. Por isso que eu tô assistindo esses, né, cara? Beleza, gurizada. Eu vou encerrar a live que minha esposa tá me esperando pra jantar lá. Chegou a janta já e ela ficou me esperando lá. Então não vou abusar da boa vontade dela também, né? Mas fico feliz, cara. Manteve a galera o tempo todo assistindo. Acho que a galera curtiu. E semana que vem vamos seguir, repetir a dose aí, cara. Assistir um documentáriozinho sobre games, né, cara? Que é a coisa que a gente gosta bastante, né? Edson Duda, isso se concretizar, vai ser pancada ainda mais na união de equipes portátil, console de mesa trabalhando junto. Então, cara. Cara, a Nintendo vai tirar... Ela vai sugar o Switch, cara. Tudo que eu tô dizendo, ela vai sugar de todas as formas, cara. Colvara, não, de repente, quando eu me lembrar, sei que o I... Como é que é? Parou de acender. Ou será que... Ou será que mexi nas configurações? Não, não tem configuração pra o LED não acender, não, o Hiro. Mandei no WhatsApp, Colvara. De boa, Gabriel Lopes. Foi massa, né? Foi massa a livezinha. Gostei também, cara, de curtir aí. Sériezinha. Belezinha, gurizada? Obrigado pela presença de todos, então. Vou indo nessa lá, já é 00:30. Deve estar louca de fome. Belezinha, um bom sábado pra todos aí. Eu garanto que a maioria vai curtir um game agora aí. E era isso, cara. Obrigado pela gente todos. Obrigado por curtir esse seriadinho. Acho que é uma sériezinha boa a gente fazer com mais frequência, catar alguns documentários sobre games aí e a gente assistir junto. Acho demais isso, cara. Belezinha, gurizada? Vou indo nessa. Aquele grande abraço e fui. Feitoria, falou!